manage water by inventing methods of carrying water to people, such as the Roman aqueducts, and by developing irrigation methods, as in ancient Mesopotamia. Managing the potable water we have is even more necessary today since we now have 8 billion people living on this earth sharing this limited resource. To do this, we need to cut down on how much water we use. For example, when we take a shower, we need to be careful about how long the water is on. Think about the amount of time the water is running while you wait for a shower to heat up. That water is clean, safe water that is going straight down the drain. This is such a big problem because of how little drinking water we have on Earth. We have only a small portion of clean water, so it is terrible that so much gets wasted every day. Some things as simple as leaving the water on for less time while washing our hands or turning off the water while you brush your teeth are things we can do as individuals to better manage our water. Now, passing things to Dominic.
Thank you, Scarlett. Water is carried more than 700 miles through aqueducts from Northern California to Southern California. Around 75% of our water comes from the snowpack in the mountains and other water sources in Northern California because the northern part of our state gets more water than the south, even though more people live in Southern California. Local water agencies like the Vallecitos Water District purchase water from wholesale agencies, treat the water so it is safe to drink, and deliver it through a system of pipes to residents and businesses. Mr. Robbins visited the Costa Meadows and showed us the water meters that measure how much water our school uses for potable water, irrigation, and fire suppression. He also gave us some cool stuff like aerators and shower timers. Now I'll be passing it down to Anneli.
Thank you, Dominic. Hi, my name is Anneli, and I will be talking about drinking water. Drinking water is potable water and is very scarce in some places and cannot be accessed very easily in many areas around the world. Salt water is not drinkable because of how much salt it has. It has to go through a complicated process that costs a lot of money for humans to be able to drink it. There are very strict rules in the United States about how clean water needs to be considered potable and safe for humans to drink. We looked at our school's water bill and figured out that we only needed to pay about 1 penny per gallon for potable water from Vallecitos. We did a water taste test in our class where we tasted the water from around the school, including the teacher's lounge water, the water filler for students, tap water, and bottled water. It was interesting to find out that tap water was the top choice by both students and our VIP guests, and it was the cheapest. If we replaced all the water we use at our school with bottled water, our monthly bill would go over $2 million. I'm going to pass it on to Harper to talk about the water we use at our school.
Thank you, Nellie. Hi, I'm Harper, and I'm here to talk about the water we use at La Costa Meadows. We use water in so many ways, such as washing our hands, drinking, using the restrooms, cooking, cleaning, and much more. We run around campus and measure the flow rate of our faucets. We used a pitcher that was measured in ounces and held it under the sink and ran it for 10 seconds. We wrote down the number of ounces of water in the pitcher. After we were done with that, we converted the measurement to gallons per minute. We found out that the flow rate of our classroom sinks is about 1.5 gallons per minute. The sinks in the student bathrooms have a flow rate of only 0.45 gallons per minute. We think that the pressure in the classroom sinks are too high and might be wasting water that goes down the drain. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Eloise so she can talk about the water while hand washing at school.
Thank you, Harper. Hello, my name is Eloise, and I will be talking about the student water used when hand washing at La Costa Meadows. In our class, we conducted an experiment where we went to different grades and observed how long it took for students from each grade to wash their hands. We calculated the average time spent washing hands and the number of times they wash their hands each day. On average, the water ran for 12 and 5,600 seconds per student during each hand washing. Students wash their hands in the classroom approximately once per day and about 2 times a day in the school restrooms. From this, the data we were able to calculate how much water is being used by our students for hand washing and the cost. Now, I hand it over to Cameron.
Thank you, Eloise. My name is Cameron, and I'll be educating you about our data collection and analysis. There's going to be a lot of numbers, so don't worry. Even though we may not realize it, our water bill is one of the best deals money-wise, just under 1 cent per gallon. But at our school, we use much more than needed with one sole thing, student hand washing. After interviewing younger classes, we found the number of hand washing in classrooms is up to 673 times per day, while in the restroom, it comes up to approximately 1,571 times per day. After we timed the flow rate of the sinks, we found out that the school uses 359 gallons per day and 11,130 gallons per month just for student hand washing. We also calculated that the amount of water used for hand washing is 5.4% of all the potable water used at school, and the total cost of water each month for hand washing is $111.30. This valuable data was collected through numerous experiments and interviews with students at school. We all got together and worked hard with math to calculate the amounts, percentages, and cost of water we use. Now I'm going to hand it over to Nixon.
Hello, my name is Nixon, and for this part of the presentation, I'll be telling you about something called wastewater. Wastewater is not limited to just wasted water, like the water that runs down the drain while we wait for the shower to heat up. It's also the water that has been used to wash hands, take showers and baths, flush toilets, do dishes, run loads of laundry, and more. Those activities actually contaminate the water, but not as bad as you would really think. All of the dirt, food, toilet paper, and other gross things, as well as the soap and cleansers we use, go into the wastewater pipes. Some people actually put things such as dental floss and flushable wipes down the toilet. These items not only contaminate the water, they also clump together and create something called fatberg. Fatberg consists of waste that clumps together and makes a big fibrous clog. When you put dental floss and flushable wipes down the drain, lots of times it will clog up the sewer systems and cause backups down the really long stretch of sewer pipes. The flushable wipes that you flush in your toilets maybe not every day, but sometimes every day, are not actually flushable. They just cause a lot of problems for the sewer system. These clogs are very difficult to clean out. Another problem with wastewater is something called fog, or fats, oils, and grease. These items cause a layer of fat to build up inside the pipe, reducing the diameter of the sewers and requiring a lot of effort to clean. We learned that it is very important to scrape our plates into the trash and pour oils and grease into a glass jar rather than dumping them down the sink. Mr. Murguia from the Vallecitos Water District came to our school and gave us a presentation about what happens to all the wastewater at our school. He was great at presenting about what happens, and it was very interesting. I'll now be handing it over to Cody. Thank you.
Thank you, Nixon. Reclaimed water can't be used for drinking, but it can be used for watering plants in your garden. Reclaimed water goes through purple pipes. They lead to purple sprinklers that water plants. Also, while you're driving, you may see purple signs that indicate that there are purple pipes nearby. We were surprised that 99% of wastewater can be cleaned and be reused as reclaimed water. We could have used reclaimed water to water the lower field, science garden, and the parking lot's grassy areas, since it costs 20% less than potable water. We could have saved $4,000 per year and used the money on important school stuff like books, playground equipment, technology, and more. Now Andrew may talk about irrigation.
Irrigation is the water that is used for plants. The way that the water can be dispensed is through sprinklers and drip irrigation. Drip irrigation uses hoses with holes that purposefully leak out and water the plants. The activity that we did was we went around campus and looked at the irrigation systems to see if they were good or bad. Mr. Alvera from the San Marcos Unified School District showed us the way the sprinklers and drip irrigation works on campus. We discovered a lot of problems. One of the problems we found is that rodents bite into the drip irrigation, wasting water. Although the plants could use reclaimed water instead of potable, and doing that would save thousands of gallons of potable water. And now I'll let Miles speak.
The problem with the sprinklers is that weed whackers cuts off the heads of the sprinklers. And other sprinklers are broken. That makes the water pressure high and the water just shoots upwards and out into the street. Instead of watering the plants, that wastes a lot of potable water because water is being sprayed in the wrong direction. We noticed a lot of dead plants on our campus because of these broken sprinklers. On the lower field, we found a lot of sprinkler heads that were buried or blocked in the ground. This causes a big clump of green grass to be surrounded by a large area of brown dead grass. It makes our lower field very bumpy and dangerous to run on. I shall now pass it on to Madden.
Hello, my name is Madden, and I'm going to tell you about stormwater. Stormwater is the water that has fallen onto surfaces that can absorb it, such as concrete or roads, and eventually goes down the storm drains. This water is taken out to sea by using a system of pipes. This may seem like a good thing since all of the water is no longer our problem and it reduces the risk of flooding, but the stormwater is not purified before it is transported to the ocean. As the water is being carried out to sea, it is taking all the trash and grease on the road to the ocean. Since the water is not being cleaned, this leaves all the oil, plastic, chemicals, litter, and bacteria to flow directly to the Pacific Ocean, all of which is dangerous to sea life. This is the reason that they have to close beaches after a rainstorm. One thing that can prevent trash from reaching the ocean is to put little gates near the big drains that look like holes in the sidewalk. Even though this can help reduce the trash in the ocean, the drains can get clogged if there is too much trash. This will lead to big floods or puddles. During class, we examined the storm drains on our campus. We found a lot of litter at school that could cause potential clogging hazards. We also found that most of our downspouts do not lead to storm drains, which means the water from the roof is just spilling out onto the concrete and discoloring our sidewalks. Last year, the Vallecitos Water District donated a large rain barrel to our school. That has been a big improvement to our campus because the water that is collecting on one of the roofs can now be stored in a barrel, and students can use that water to irrigate plants and vegetables in our science garden. Thank you so much for listening to me. Now I'm going to pass it on to Anthony to tell you about some of the water problems we discovered at our school.
Hello, I'm Anthony. We learned about the problems around the world with water. Many people do not have enough water, and people in other countries have to walk hours to get water. To make things worse, this water can still get people sick because it is not being traded to the same standards as water in the U.S. Another major problem with water in the world is plastics. Single-use plastic bottles are finding their ways into our oceans and waterways. Plastic bottles take more than 450 years to decompose. They are causing huge plastic islands in the middle of the ocean and are harming sea life. Also, the plastic contains harmful chemicals that leach into the water. At our school, we went around campus to identify some problems with how we use our water. The top 5 problems we saw were broken sprinkler heads, irrigating with potable water, and using higher flow rate faucets in classrooms. Our most serious problems were the use of plastic water bottles and the amount of litter we found on our campus that will eventually find its way into the storm drains. Now passing it on to Aria.
Thank you, Anthony, and good evening, Vallecitos Water District board members and staff. I'm Aria, and I'm here to talk about solutions to some of the problems that Anthony mentioned. One idea is that we could add aerators to all the classroom sinks in our school in order to slow the flow of water. Because when we were investigating, we found out that the classroom sinks use 3 times the amount of water per minute that the bathroom sinks used, and we don't need a strong flow in our classroom because we only use it for hand washing. We would like to educate students in younger grades about keeping fog and other problematic items out of our wastewater. So we would like to be able to give every student at school a food scraper. We'd also like to teach them ways to conserve potable water by taking shorter showers, turning off the water while they wash their hands or brush teeth, and checking their toilets for leaks. We would like to be able to give every student at school a blue toilet leak test tablet so their families can check for leaks. Thank you, and now I'll hand it off to Reagan to talk about more solutions for our school.
Thank you, Aria. My name is Reagan, and I'm here to talk to you about some water solutions for the problems we found with irrigation and stormwater at our school. When we were exploring all the sprinklers outside, we noticed that a lot of them were broken, causing water to be wasted and making the water bill go up. One of the things we would like to ask the Vallecitos Water District for is a water audit, so we can give our school district a list of things that need to be fixed. We would love to find a partner who might be willing to help out with the parts and labor to fix broken irrigation items, since there's only one person at the district who is responsible for maintaining all 19 San Marcos Unified School District campuses. We would also like to get 10 watering cans and 2 hoses to use with the rain barrel at LCM, so students can help irrigate plants in our science garden. Finally, we're hoping to get 10 additional trash grabbers so students can continue to help pick up litter on our campus at recess and lunch, so it doesn't go down the storm drains. Now I'll pass it on to Erin.
Thank you, Reagan. Hi, I'm Erin, and I'll be discussing the Water Resource Management Plan. Now that we have reached the end of our curriculum, we have developed a water resource management plan for La Costa Meadows Elementary. We are going to be presenting a copy of our finished report to the Vallecitos board tonight. In this plan, we explained the work we have done to learn about the water systems at our school. Furthermore, we are reporting our findings on how our school is currently using this potable water. We've highlighted pros such as the rain barrel that you provided for us last year to collect stormwater, which we are very thankful for, and cons like the problems Anthony identified earlier in our presentation. We have come up with cost-saving solutions like low-flow aerators for our classroom sinks. We would also love to replace the lower field grass with fake grass, or replace the irrigation with recycled water, both of which would bring our irrigation bill down by tons, but it would cost a lot of money to make either of those things happen. Instead, we have developed a plan to teach students in the lower grades to properly conserve potable water and protect our various water systems. Would it be alright if I could present our plan to the board vice president right now, or should I leave it with somebody? And now I'll pass it on to Logan, who can answer all of your questions.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm Logan, and I would like to thank the Vallecitos Water District. We are so thankful that you gave us this amazing opportunity to present to your board today. Thank you for sponsoring all of our lessons from Poseidon Education. We learned so much about the different types of water and their importances. We learned about potable water, reclaimed water, wastewater, and stormwater. We had many amazing special guests, some of whom work here at the Vallecitos Water District, such as Mr. Robbins, Mr. Prume, and Mr. Murguia, as well as Mr. Alvaro from the San Marcos Unified School District. This has been an amazing experience for all of us that we will remember for the rest of our lives. Now I'll take any questions, comments, or concerns at this time.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. This has been very informative, and it sounds like you learned a lot from your experience, and I'm glad to hear that. So I'd like to ask you personally, what was the most surprising thing that you learned during this journey?
I think it was most surprising of how little water we have that we can actually drink on Earth, and how much water that the ocean covers our land, and how in some parts of the world, very little amount of water people can use each day. Any more questions or anything?
Thank you for coming and presenting. You all did a wonderful job, and you should be really proud of yourselves. And thank you, parents, for bringing your children here and watching them present. I know you can be more proud. I can see it in your faces. As a parent of a student that goes to La Costa Meadows, I just want to say, go Dolphins. And my question for you is, you requested trash grabbers. Can you explain who's going to use them, what they're going to use them for?
Well, at recess, we have a program called Talking Trash, and basically that's when at recess and lunch, we use trash grabbers and other equipment to pick up trash and throw them away, and we use all the different bins of trash that we use for the trash grabbers.
Great. Do you take the bottles and separate them and
Yeah,
into
so we
recycling?
have like a liquids bin, a share table, trash, recycling, and a compost bin, so we can put all of our trash in the right bins.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you also. You know, I've been in the water business for many, many years, and whenever we have one of these events, I learn a lot, so thank you very much. Really appreciate it. What I learned tonight is Mr. Oliveira with the Unified School District is very busy.
Mhm.
And so maybe we can ask the Unified School District to get him some help to find all these broken sprinklers. So I think that would go a long way to saving some water. So it's great that you investigated that and pointed that out. Thank you.
I have a follow-up comment. One of the things that I heard was that plastic bottles are used frequently. And I want to share with you all, and I want to share with your parents, that here at the Water District, we have made a concerted effort to reduce our use of single-use plastics. And what we have here is something called boxed water. It's cardboard. And so I encourage your school and your teachers to maybe think about lobbying the administration to replace the plastic bottles there. It was a relatively easy substitution process here. It was not that much more expensive. It sounds to me like if you can replace some of your potable water with your recycled water for irrigation, you might be saving some money. So it might enable you to break even in that way. And I'm just really grateful that you came and presented. We often don't have a full boardroom unless we are raising rates. So this is really nice. So thank you. And again, thank you for participating. Thank you to Mrs. Pruitt for allowing us to do this again in your classroom. And I hope that we can do it again next year. Thank you, parents. I know that this is an investment of your time. Thank you for coming to watch your kid and letting them present. Anything else? Right. So I think we're going to take some pictures now. And this might be a little bit of a process. We're going to have kid pictures, kid with board pictures, parents with kid pictures, if you would like, up in front of the dais. So we will accommodate whatever you would like.
Okay, students, on your feet. Okay, you've already been through this before. Tall ones in the back, shorter ones in the front. You probably should come up front. Yeah, but now you're right in front of me. Yeah, you need to find the windows between the faces. Yeah. Okay. You don't have to. Okay, now, parents, this is your chance. Get your phone out, get your camera out. Go ahead and take a picture. Just kind of look your phone out, get your shots.
Why? Smile with your eyes. Cool. Yellow, blue. Red. Which one's the bad? That one. Pink. The blue one. Purple. My mom has green. Wait, why? I don't know. Because I can. Red. Your phone color. Light.
Everybody get a chance?
Black. Yeah.
Pink.
Okay, now I'm gonna ask her. No, what the heck are you doing? Stop it. I told them everyone. Why do you guys want to go listen to mine? White. Black. Real camera. Orange. Pink. Purple. Green. Brown. Black. Silver. Gold.
Everybody take one step to your left.
Wait, that's what she
Board members, let's bring board members in.
We should all elect him. Look at Mr. Pruitt's son. That's all it is.
Okay, now everybody smile. This is fun. Got it. Any parents want any more shots?
No, please.
Thanks so much. You have a great class. Excellent presentation. Very professional.
And Kobe's right there.
So let's give everyone one more round of applause. And one of the challenges of being on a board is that we often are asked for things, And you had several different asks for us, and we are very pleased to let you know that we have been able to provide some of the asks right here tonight. They include watering cans, trash grabbers, and hoses. And I believe we are talking about the logistics of getting several of the other things that you asked for to you. And we will get back to you about that at a later time. Thank you.
Brothers and sisters that got stuck just kind of hanging around, that's a good helper job.
If I don't mind, if a couple students don't mind taking a couple things, whatever you take with you, bring to school and do tomorrow, that would be super helpful because I can't carry it all. All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So as the students and teachers and parents make their way out, we will take attendance one more time. If we can bring that up, thank you. Okay, 4 present, 1 absent.
No, hour and 45 minutes. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Scott. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, are you out of here?
No, he's just starting. Did you hear their presentation about Encino? Yeah.
I didn't have that kind of, I couldn't do that.
Okay, we will keep moving forward with our meeting. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. We will move on to the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are generally considered non-controversial, but I will check to see if there are any board members that would like to pull an item from the consent calendar. Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move to approve?
Director Pinnock moves.
Second.
Second, Director Ellithorpe. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Okay, and we have 4 unanimous approval. Okay, moving on to action items. Item 2.1, adoption of the resolution approving the Encino Wastewater Authority's fiscal year 2024 operating and capital improvement budget. Do we have any public speakers for this item? We do.
Yeah, we do. So I'll kick it off real quickly, and then I'll introduce Scott. So as you know, Vallecitos is one of 6 member agencies of the Encino Wastewater Authority, and they prepare an annual operating and capital budget just like we do. And in order to finalize their budget, they have to get all of their member agencies to approve it. So that's what we're here to do today, is to turn our key as one of 6 member agencies to get that approved. So Scott will walk you through the budget. This is Scott McClellan, the general manager for Encino Wastewater Authority. But before he does begin, I want to assure the board that the numbers you're going to hear from Scott, at least our share of those numbers, have been incorporated into the budget that you'll hear about the next item from Wes. So unless the board has any questions for me, I'll turn it over to Scott. All right, Scott.
No questions for the general manager, huh? So, okay. Thank you again. I'm happy to be back. I think this is the 3rd or 4th year that I've actually been able to present this to the Vallecitos board. As one of our 6 member agencies, it's very important for us to gain the concurrence of all of our member agencies for our budget on an annual basis. So thank you again for the invitation. And I apologize, I'm probably not going to be as smooth as the 5th graders up here, so I'll do my best. But
Scott, I think you were here a year ago when they were here.
Yes.
Same presentation.
Okay, so moving, where am I pointing this thing at? No? Oops, all right. Okay. So the budget process for Encina is actually a fairly lengthy process. As you can imagine, there's a lot of conversations that go along with member agencies, internal staff conversations as well. We get started in February on a formal basis where we begin talking to the member agencies about a variety of different things, mostly budget schedule, CIP updates, a lot of prep work that goes into that. March, we really start hitting it hard. We begin to see a lot of the numbers come together. And so March is spent with a lot of budget review, update, a fairly complicated process internally there. But ultimately, we present some of the remote facilities budgets to our member agencies that own those, and that's Carlsbad and Vista. Fortunately for Vallecitos, you're not a remote facility owner, so you can ignore that. But we do get into the member agency manager's review, of which Glenn is our member agency manager for Vallecitos. And that is really the first opportunity that MAM has, or member agencies have, at reviewing the budget as a whole package. We spend, as staff, quite a bit of time walking the member agencies through the primary elements of the budget. Our budget on a year-to-year basis is pretty consistent from a format perspective, but not necessarily from a numbers perspective there. In April, we go through a process of getting the formal board concurrence. We meet again in the early April with the member agency managers to receive their comments. Again, do some more budget adjustments and continue to refine it. As the month goes on, we have present the Policy and Finance Committee with our operating budget, which is one component of our budget. And then following week, we present the Capital Improvements Committee with our capital budget, again, the other component to the Encina budget. Ultimately, April 26th, the Board of Directors did unanimously approve Encina's budget and recommended it for approval and adoption by the member agencies, which is why we are here today talking about that. Ultimately, all of our member agencies will go through this same process and approve the budget as well. In July, we come back with the final action, which is our actually puts the controls of our budget in place so that the appropriate appropriations can be set up so that we can actually spend the money. So this is the budget summary. And what I really want to highlight here on this budget summary is, because of the very unique situation that we're in at Encina and across the industry with the high cost increases associated with power, chemicals, natural gas, and biosolids disposal, Encina took the perspective this year of how can we minimize that impact on our member agencies from a cash out the door perspective. And so in the operating program, we have not a whole lot of room to move money around, not a whole lot of discretion as far as what kind of funds we're going to spend. Most of our operating budget, in fact, half of our operating budget is labor. I can't arbitrarily decide, okay, I'm not going to put the operators in the field today kind of stuff. So what we really looked at, again, from a cash flow perspective, is how do we minimize that impact to the member agencies by reducing our capital program expenditures. This is not canceling projects. This is delaying the start of projects. And we can delay projects for a few months without much detrimental impact, and that actually allows us to request less money for the capital expenditures for next year. So that's why you see this capital operating program at 20% increase there, and then operating program at 20%, and then the capital program at a negative 4.25% increase, for a total 6% total increase in the overall budget for Encina. That budget did include some staffing requests. In this particular year, we requested and the board granted a full-time equivalent position for a Chemist 1 position. This is actually due to a series of requirements by ELAP, which is the accreditation for the state of California for laboratories such as Encina Wastewater Authority. We now have to meet a much higher quality assurance, quality control program to be a state certified lab. We've got to develop a lot of programs and documentation, much of which has already been developed. But what it's doing is putting a much bigger burden on our lab staff and more requirements on our lab staff. Without adding another position, we can't continue to form the volume of samples that we do process through that lab on an annual basis. So what we did to try and minimize, again, the impact of this, and you'll see that our net cost on this was about $78,000. We eliminated the part-time lab tech position, and so that's going to turn into a full-time, so there's some savings associated there. Most of the QA/QC requirements that ELAB has are going to be done by senior level staff. So rather than hiring a specific QA/QC manager in the lab at a very senior level, what we've done is we've put that requirement on the existing lab staff and then moved some of the day-to-day analysis work down to the lowest level of chemist 1 position. So again, allows us to bring in a person that can support the operations but not cost what it might cost for a full-on QA/QC lab person. That was the only position that we asked for, and again, the board approved on that. So moving on to the operating program, this is the total proposed budget for the Encina operating program. And you can see by far the lion's share is the Encina Water Pollution Control Facility, or EWPCF. This is the plant there. It's also made up of other buckets that you can see there: source control, the remote facility pump stations. Again, these are operating costs associated with that. Again, Vallecitos does not have a remote pump station, so we'll skip over those, nor do they have the Carlsbad Water Recycling Facility or any of the others below. So really what the component that's part of the Vallecitos budget is those first two: Encina Water Pollution Control Facility and source control. We also have another estimated revenue, and this is revenue that comes into Encina that the member agencies do not pay. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in one of the slides, but we basically calculate the operating expenses and then we back out the revenue that we expect to receive, and that gets us our net operating expenses for the year. So this year, with the very unusual situation that we have, it's really a tale of two years. So what we are seeing is we start with our FY23 budget, or approved budget, at $19.5 million there. And we need to, and what we have proposed is the $23.5 million. That's a pretty significant increase. But what's actually happened is this year, the FY23 budget is about $1.2 million over budget this year. This is primarily driven, those of you that are on Encina's board, which Director Pennock and Director Hernandez have already heard that, and it's really driven by the cost of chemicals, the cost of gas, the cost of electricity, and the cost of biosolids disposal. For instance, the cost of gas rose from the time that we estimated the budget in 2023, so this time last year when we developed that budget, to January of this year. The cost of gas, natural gas, rose 333% for us. We will be over budget in just that line item alone by about $350,000 just for the year. And so that is what we're trying to make up for. So when we talk about that 20%, that's really moving from a budget in early 2023 or early 2022 that was under budgeted, considering the market drivers that were actually going to go on during our 2023 budget year. That's about a 6.1% increase. The electricity, that line item there is over by about $300,000. Again, driven by the cost of natural gas on the general market. Costs more to generate the electricity. Those costs get handed directly down to Encina on that. Chemicals, when we look at the chemical budgets for Encina, we had that Ukraine conflict start up all of a sudden in early 2022. And so what we got out of that was a high cost of oil. The cost of oil on a per barrel basis skyrocketed there. This had a direct ripple effect on all of the chemicals that we use because a lot of them are oil-based derivatives there. So our polymers, one of our largest chemical consumption costs for the plant, is an oil-based derivative. Not only does it impact the generation of the chemicals or the production of the chemicals, it also impacts the cost to move the chemicals from their point of origin to Encina. So it's that truck traffic that is costing more as well. which ultimately became the primary driver for the biosolids increase as well. It became that much more expensive. It wasn't that the disposal was more expensive, it was the hauling portion of that. So when we look again at the 24 estimated increase, it's about $2.7 million. Again, to make up that gap, get to a point where the budget is realistic, represents a plausible spend for the following year. So that's the additional 14%, and ultimately we get to that full 20.3% increase on that. So as I've been talking about here, so what is really driving those net operating expenses on that? You can see 75% of the total increase there is all due to those factors: chemical, energy, biosolids, South Parcel revenue. I'll talk about that in a second and where that's actually going. A few other minor miscellaneous things like IT services and insurance as well. You can see the other portions of it. So if we had had a normal year where those elements had been relatively stable, we would see personnel and other costs rising at about $900,000, a pretty reasonable increase in the budget at that point. So here I've mentioned the other revenue here several times on this. So Encina receives additional revenue that the member agencies are not or do not pay. And this is actually an offset of revenue. So we generate the budget, we say, okay, Vallecitos' representative part of that budget is $3.8 million for operating, but we also receive income from these different types of sources there. So those lab services that I talked about, they're not just for Encina. We farm out and operate effectively a commercial lab at the Encina facility for which we collect fees on a per analysis basis. And that money goes right back into the operating budget, which is $1 that the member agencies don't have to cover. Alternative fuels, this is our Stone Brewery and Pizza Port and our fats, oils, and grease that I heard some of the fifth graders talk about, come directly into our plant. We have a tipping fee associated with those, that's what that is. And then there's a bunch of other miscellaneous income that we also receive, some of which are from fines from bad actors on the source control program as well. What you notice is missing in 2024 relative to 2023 is that South Parcel leasing revenue. That has completely dried up. We're no longer able to lease our South Parcel and gain revenue from tenants on that site anymore. Just to make a very long story short, we more or less have dried up the market for that. And the city of Carlsbad has also made it very clear to us that we need to change how we're managing that parcel, and we're going to have to go through a little bit more planning process with the city of Carlsbad to renew that effort on that. So that's really what's driving it. So when you take the combination of higher costs, commodity costs, and less revenue coming in, that's when you get that increase there. So what is Vallecitos' share on this? You can see that your component associated with this is about $3.8 million on there, and it's primarily driven at the EWPCF with the usage factors there, of which the three components are flow, BOD, and SS, or suspended solids on that. Ironically, all of the member agencies went down this year, so the usage factors went down. The question is how much did you go down? Vallecitos went down the most out of all of the member agencies. And so what this is making, if I can use an analogy, is a pie. I still got a pie. The pie's a little bit smaller because there's less usage now on it. And so we have to divide that whole pie up according to how much usage. So Vallecitos, you'll see in a few slides, actually came out really well this year with a pretty minimal increase in the overall budget as compared to last year. So this is, again, revenue summary on that. So on the operating side of things, it's an increase of $431,000 or 13%. There, again, there's other revenue that we apply to the Vallecitos bill, assuming that we get that money in. So the reality is that Vallecitos is on the hook for $3.8 million, but there's about $118,000 worth of revenue that'll likely come in that will drop that down to about $3.7 million. So let's move over to the capital program here. The capital program has 4 different buckets, if you will, in it. The largest lion's share of that is the CIP, or Capital Improvements Program, of which about $19 million is spent on an average year on that. Again, back to my opening slide about the budget, this is about cash flow. So we're trying to, again, reduce the impact on the member agencies, reducing the amount of money that the capital program is consuming so that the overall increase is minimized to the Vallecitos district there. The capital program is also, like I say, comprised of 4 different elements there. We have a capital improvements program. I'll kind of walk you through a high-level picture of what that looks like. Planned asset and rehabilitation and replacement. These are projects that are generally 1 year in duration or less. They're relatively small value. They can be done either by staff or contractors that we may have do. Capital acquisitions is about buying parts, big dollar parts and pieces associated with the plant. And I'll just mention this, while we're not buying a vehicle this year, this is where the vehicle would go. So things like that, large pumps, fans, that are all part and parcel of the operation of the operation there. Then the remote facilities, again, they have a capital program associated with theirs, but you guys don't have any of that associated with it. And then there's a component of the salary and benefits for the entire Encina labor pool that gets allocated out to capital as well. So again, big picture on this. When you start looking at the capital improvements by process area, we can see the list there, liquid process outfall, et cetera, on there. You see the Encina proposed budget. What you'll notice is that the single largest project is actually in the solids processing area in that, but you see general has a large number as well. So the 2 big projects or some of the big projects I'm gonna go through in another slide, but what I wanna point out on this slide is it's $19 million that's being allocated this year for our capital improvements program. There's an additional $13 million of carry forward. This is money that was allocated and authorized by the board and the member agencies in prior years on projects that we did not completely get done with, or the cash flow for those associated projects, if they're long-term projects, did not come in as we estimated on that. So do we expect the entire $13 million to get spent? Probably not, but we will be very close to watching that very closely over the next year on that. So moving on to the big projects that are associated with the capital improvements program, you can see here and highlighted in colors, you're looking at about 60% of the total overall capital expenditures for FY24 are in these 6 projects. And I'm going to walk through them very quickly. You see the digester improvements project. That has about an $8.3 million spend. We're right in the middle of the actual construction project for this. We've gone through and we're going to completely drain, clean, interior coat, exterior coat the dome on it. A lot of improvements associated with the pumping systems and pipes and the electrical system and control system with that. That project is likely to be done next year, but we'll probably dribble on to the year following a little bit. Again, there's some supply chain issues associated with that project right now. The other one, just moving down the list, is the DAF repairs project. This is infrastructure that dates back to the 1980s and in severe need of rehabilitation. There's actually 2 parts to this project, so we're in phase 1 right now. What that phase 1 is to rehabilitate the mechanical internals of those tanks there. This is part of our solids processing program. Phase 2 will rehabilitate the electrical and controls facilities and some of the ancillary facilities. That project hasn't even started in design yet. So this is just phase 1 for the DAF rehabilitation there. PSB stands for Primary Sedimentation Basin. This is the front end of the plant where about 80% of the nutrients the nutrients and BOD are removed in our process. We're doing this project and it's a series of 3 different steps in this. This is the first year that we're going to go through the design and ultimately bid the rehabilitation work on basins 1, 2, and 7 in our primaries facilities there. We'll have other follow-on stages of that, which is just basically working sequentially through those basins one at a time to do the rehabilitation effort there. Admin building and HVAC, I mentioned that there was that general category. This is that big project that's in the general category. You see the administration building was built in 2008. Much of the HVAC system in that building has been deteriorated and in bad need of rehabilitation on that. In fact, we had our condenser actually fail on us about 1.5 years ago. We had to do emergency authorization to replace that condenser in there. That condenser went in, but now we've got to deal with a lot of the existing system that's inside that facility there. We are in a very corrosive environment with the wastewater treatment facility there, a lot of H2S and other corrosive gases that are constantly inside that bowl that represents the plant. But we also are battling the ocean and the salty marine air that comes in right there off the coast as well. It's all had a pretty significant impact on that HVAC system.
Don't you have windows?
I'm sorry?
Don't you have windows? You're on the coast. You have windows. I mean,
Yeah, we have windows, but I'm not talking about just windows. Well, interestingly enough, on this project, a significant amount of money of this project is actually being spent in the laboratory to improve the air control and inside that lab there. We got several fume hoods in there that are just completely rotted.
it's not just admin. It is lab.
Yeah. Well, when we say admin building, it's that entire building that you get into there, yeah. In other words, it's not a process building on there. So, the CBC, which stands for Secondaries, Effluent, and Electrical Buildings and Controls Project, is a series of projects around the plant that are designed to address a variety of different needs in some of those buildings. Most of it is around structural rehabilitation and roofing rehabilitation, as well as electrical and controls in some of those facilities there that you see in that purple shade. And then we also have another contract that's out, and this is a design build contract for building roof repairs, primarily on our primaries facility and some of the CBC projects as well on that. So that's a total, that comprises the bulk of the capital expenditures. But to give you an idea, this is 6 of about 43 projects on our capital list for next year. So there's quite a bit of volume that's going through Encina right now for that. So the capital allocation associated with Vista or Vallecitos, again, we are dealing with the cash flow issue. We want to minimize that impact, so we reduce that capital expenditure quite a bit from last year's, down about 4.6% on that. Vallecitos' share on that is about $5.3 million.
I'm having a question on that, Scott.
Looking at the combination of it, sorry.
Yeah, on the capital deferral, was that particular projects or just delaying the start of some of these major projects?
Yeah, so what we're doing is delaying the start on some of them, so that, again, the project is not going away, nor are the costs getting any cheaper. But because of that huge increase, we had to find some way to kind of balance things out.
So you're still doing the project?
Yeah, the projects are still going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then so when we look at the combination of the operating and capital allocation here, remember I said that Vallecitos is in the best position. You can see that with a 1.2% overall increase in operating and capital budgets combined there on there. So you guys came out pretty good, mostly because your utilization factor, in other words, the amount of flow, BOD, and suspended solids that are coming into the plant attributable to the Vallecitos service area, it went down so much. Other facility or other owners also went down, but not nearly as much as Vallecitos did. So with that, I'll ask for any questions, and I'm happy to chat about anything in the budget or other things too.
What questions do people have?
If I can add real quickly. So our board is being asked to approve the entire EWA budget, right? But we're not on the hook for the entire EWA budget. We're on the hook for our share, but the action is to express our approval of the entire budget. And this, I think, is the 3rd year in a row that we've been the first agency to act on this. Yes. So this is good. So we'll be happy to accept that Trailblazer 5% discount.
I appreciate you guys getting on the ball so quickly. So makes our job a little easier.
What questions do folks have?
Yes.
How many people work there?
I'm sorry?
How many people work there?
At Encina, we have 75 with that extra chemist, 76. So, yeah. We run to give you a plan, I know you, the rest of you guys know this, but that facility is a 40 million gallon a day facility. It's the largest secondary treatment facility in San Diego County, secondary treatment. Point Loma's bigger, but it's only advanced primary on there. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So if I may add, I definitely appreciate the input, especially James and Glenn and Wes. Where's Wes? He's sitting right over there. They lived through the battle, or I shouldn't say the battle, but the budget development part. And so I do want to thank them for their efforts and their insight on developing this budget as well.
I have a question. It looks like you're getting about $500,000 from the feds for a grant for your operating and capital. Is there any state money available?
Is there what? Sorry.
Is there any state money that comes in?
No. So that $500,000 grant actually is an $800,000 grant. We're splitting it up into a couple of years. Mm-hmm. It's for a pilot test for water reuse facilities in Encina there. And they are offsetting some of the cost of that. It's a in-kind match grant, so we had to match that with either money, services, or equipment.
Okay, thank you.
That leads into my question. Any updates on potable reuse?
I'm happy to come talk to this board about potable reuse, but
Great.
I don't know that you want to hear all about it right now.
Okay.
But yes, we actually, the coalition members, which Vallecitos is one, you recall voting on that, met last week, 2 weeks ago, something like that. Yeah, it was last week, last Tuesday. And we got all the coalition members in a room, kind of got everybody on the same page, posed some questions to them, asked them to consider what we were doing. We're working on that pilot study as well as the strategic plan development. It was very clear that there needs to be more understanding or a better understanding of what the costs are associated with the project, which you would expect. At this point now, a lot of our cost numbers are 5+ years old from the feasibility analysis in 2018. So that's where we're spending our next effort is updating those costs, trying to get a better handle on and understanding on what county water authorities' costs really are in the county. That's a big element to this. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I do have a question. Who sits on the potable reuse board? Who are the constituents? Is it the two of you, or do?
Okay, so the advocacy agencies are Vallecitos Water District. I'll list them first, of course. City of Carlsbad, Olivenhain Water District, Santa Fe Irrigation District, and San Diego Water District.
Okay.
That's the advocacy agencies. You also have all of the 5-6 member agencies of the Encina Wastewater Authority that are part of that group. Vallecitos and Carlsbad double up on that, and San Diego and Encinitas are the same entity anyway, so it's kind of like those three are really doubling up on that.
Okay. Who represents Vallecitos at those meetings?
So right now it's your general manager that's sitting at those meetings. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions?
So you mentioned chemicals, nat gas, and oil are kind of three of the main reasons behind the large increase?
So when you look at, if I understand what you're asking there, is when you look at the cost component associated with chemicals, gas, electricity, and the biosolids, those are where that 75% of that budget increase is sitting right now, in just those 4 elements there.
Yep. I guess the next part of that is we've noticed a large decrease in these things that we just mentioned, nat gas, specifically oil, down to $68 a barrel today. No one knows where it's going to be, but is there some form of a rebate or offset should these prices continue to decline?
I wish there was a rebate on that, and unfortunately, just like you and I at home, we pay what SDG&E socks to us. So it is what it is, and we just have to figure out how to manage it.
But if I can add to that, if the costs do come down, EWA only bills us for their actual costs.
Oh, okay.
So if we see a decrease in chemical costs or energy costs, the billings will actually be lower than the budgeted amount. So we're not committed to this dollar amount, but it theoretically sets the upper level.
Good. Thank you for that. And then I would be remiss if I didn't inquire more about the HVAC project. It's for that building alone, $3.9 million to replace. Is it everything? Is it?
It is, I don't want to say it's everything. What we did was we went through a design build, or progressive design build process to determine the scope of the work. And if you're not familiar with progressive design build, some of you may be familiar with design build, but it provides Encina an opportunity to select a contractor on competitive qualifications. Then the contractor spends quite a bit of time, and we pay the contractor some token amount really, to go through the facility and figure out what's wrong with the facility, what needs to be replaced. They document all of that. It's a very extensive document. Then there's a negotiation between Encina staff, our construction manager that works for us, and that contractor with a very open book costing model. So we get to see exactly what that contractor is charging for a piece of pipe, a valve, an air handling unit. Anything that's on that project, we see that. And we allow the contractor a set amount of markup on that. That's all per the contract. Once we've developed that scope and decided as between the contractor and Encina staff and the construction manager, as well as our consultant that's advising us, that's an HVAC expert, once we get to that point, then we take that project to the board and recommend it for award on that.
Got it. And to just better understand that first point, they didn't have to be the lowest bid. It's a specialty contractor.
Yeah, so we don't, when you do a progressive design build, you don't really pick on lowest bidder. You pick on qualifications there. And in doing so, that gives you the opportunity to go through that open book negotiations associated with that. It's a good process for a facility like Encina and that HVAC system where you have to dig so far into it that you need to literally pull tiles off the ceiling, get guys climbing up inside the ceiling to figure out what's going on. I don't want to pay for that twice. I don't want to pay for that for a consultant to go through, do a bunch of design drawings, put it out to bid the project, and then have the project come in. What I want is the contractor to say, based on our expertise in building and designing these facilities, I would recommend addressing the issues this way, and this is what needs to be addressed there. So, and it does save quite a bit of time as well on that. So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, I will entertain a motion to adopt a resolution approving the Encina Wastewater Authority's fiscal year 2024 recommended operating and capital improvement budget.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, moved by Director Elitharp,
I can second.
second by Director Pennock. Any further discussion?
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, please vote. Okay, 4 yes. Director Hernandez absent.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. See you next year.
With the elementary school.
With the elementary school students. Okay, moving on to action item 2.2, the Vallecitos Water District fiscal year 2023-2024 budget update. Do we have any public speakers for this agenda item?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, I will turn it over to General Manager Pruitt.
Thank you, Vice President. So the item before the board is simply an update to the budget. This is probably the first time the full board has heard the level of detail that you're about to hear about our budget, which does incorporate, as I mentioned before, does incorporate the EWA budget, at least our percentage of those. So our Chief Financial Officer, Wes, is going to walk you through the presentation, but I wanted to just say a few things to preface the presentation. So the numbers you see tonight are not final, right? This is a work in progress. Our plan is to take the budget to the board for adoption on June 7th. You're also going to hear it on, you'll hear another update on May 17th. So any information that you give us today will be incorporated into that presentation on the 17th. And any information you give us on the 17th will be incorporated into the final budget numbers on June 7th. We're not here tonight to talk about rates. That's important to distinguish. We know that the budget and the rates are closely interrelated. And the budget forecasts do include certain assumptions on rates, right? We are, for the revenue side of the budget, we are predicting or building in rate increases into the future. Some of those are built in because we already went through the water Prop 218 process. Those numbers. And then there's also some rate increases assumed on the wastewater side, even though we haven't gone through a Prop 218 process on the wastewater side. So, but the setting of rates will be conducted in a separate forum. That if it hasn't already been done, it'll be in a separate forum in full compliance with Proposition 218. And most importantly, remember, a budget is a planning document. That's all it is, right? We take our best estimate and we apply those assumptions to the budget numbers as we see them into our operations, and that's what you see. We use the most accurate information available at the time. You know, things are changing. Chemical costs are changing. Power costs are changing. But I think you'll see from Wes's presentation that historically we do a pretty good job. Our budget estimates are pretty close to the actuals. So with those kind of caveats on there, just keep in mind that these are estimates and it's a work in progress. I'll turn it over to Wes. So Wes, take it away.
I made the mistake of saving two documents, so we opened the wrong one first. Right. And now it's closed.
I brought up the most recent version.
Fifth graders didn't have any problem.
Actually, on their way out, I actually got some tips from them on how to improve the budget and do better for the district, so I took notes. So this is just the draft. I can work in their comments and suggestions into the final budget, so. Okay, good evening. Vice President Boyd Hudson, members of the board. Tonight should be a fun presentation. We're actually going to do a budget update. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to get the board caught up to what the Finance Committee has been working on. We've had two very detailed, extensive committee meetings. So tonight we'll get the rest of the board caught up, and then we'll even present some new and exciting information to the board too. So yeah, stay tuned. Okay, so we always start off with the budget party page. We're talking about 2024 now, so that's the most exciting part of our change to this slide, and I'm going to take you down the down Savings Street, or Budget Street and Savings Avenue. So the agenda for tonight, we first start with the actual versus budget for the last 6 years, so we get an idea of how we've done budget to actual for the last 6 years. After that, we're going to talk about the preliminary salaries and benefits for fiscal year 2024. Then we'll go into the operating budget requests. Next will be the capital budget requests. And then the new and exciting information, Mike will be talking about the water purchases and revenues. And we may even have a surprise in there too. And then we're going to talk about the preliminary reserve levels, which is also new information for this board meeting. So getting started, as promised, well, first thing we do every budget year is we develop a budget calendar. This gives us a roadmap and a guide for the meetings and what we'll be presenting to the committee and to the board. So the budget calendar for this year, we first do our internal process in February, which is to update the budget with the actual audited financial statements, 2022 numbers, and we start working on the 2023 projections. And then the individual departments are requested to submit their operating request to the finance department by the end of February. Then in March, our internal process is to put the departmental budgets into the operating budget, finish up the current year projections, and start working on the payroll estimates. And then on March 17th, we had our first Finance Committee meeting. In that meeting, we actually talked about the budget calendar, which we're talking about now. And then we went over the budget versus actual for the last 5 years. You know, might have noticed it said 6 years before, so that bonus 6th year. So now we'll talk about the budget versus actual. So this is the budget versus actual for the water operations. And you can see in 2021, we were about 6.61% under budget at the end of the year. This was mostly the result of not being able to get work done. We had a hard time getting vendors on site. We had supply shortages, things like that. So a lot of those expenses didn't necessarily get eliminated, but got moved into fiscal year 2022. So looking at 2022, we actually came in under budget again, about 5.77%, or $745,000. This resulted from several departments being under budget, such as meters was under budget by $256,000. A lot of that was, part of it was labor. Part of it was also we had a proactive meter replacement program that we had budgeted that we weren't able to get to because we're having a hard time getting meters. We're having a hard time getting MXUs. We're having a hard time getting a lot of those products, so we weren't able to do that meter replacement program. Customer service was also under budget by $263,000. You may remember back during the COVID times, we actually had a plan by Raftellus where we had to increase our bad debt expense because we weren't sure what was going to happen. And part of that plan towards the tail end was to recover from that. So we started with like 10 times our bad debt expense and went down to 50%, 25%. Well, we really haven't had that impact us. So we budgeted $194,000 in bad debt expense for 2022, and we really didn't realize that at all. So we're under budget in customer service. We also didn't incur the cost to lock people. So there are notices we send out and the fees to go out and lock people. So actually that caused us to be under budget as well. We didn't start locking again until March of 2022. Next, the IT department, information technology, was actually under budget as well, about $178,000. Some of that was labor, some of it was related to outside services and just deferring of outside service contracts. And then moving on to the sewer budget versus actual for the last 6 years, we can see that in 2022, sewer actually came in under budget, about 9.17%. Again, we had several departments that were under budget. Collection and conveyance was under budget. Most of that was due to outside services, again, just having a hard time getting work done. We had some manhole raising that we weren't able to get to, some weed abatement, and some others work on the Vector maintenance truck that we weren't able to do. Customer service was another department that was under budget for the same reasons. Customer service is split between water and sewer, so they were under budget that year for the same thing, the bad debt expense, so we didn't realize. And then you had engineering. Engineering was under budget in labor. They had about $109,000 under budget, but most of that was due to labor. They just spent a lot more time actually working on projects, so a lot less time went to their labor, went to projects instead of the labor. So that's the budget actual for sewer. Next,
Wes, I got a quick question.
Sure.
I've noticed every year has been under quite a bit.
So it looks, yeah, for sewer, yes.
Yeah.
We were actually, we were getting better in 2021 by 1.18%, and I was all proud of that. And then we got down to 9.17% this year. And again, it's just, delays and things that we can get done. And we didn't actually, I was surprised last year when we came in only 1.18% under budget for that.
Yeah, I think we first started hearing a similar comment 3 or 4 years ago, and I think you can see we started to gradually get better, and then we really started to feel these effects of COVID, these supply chain issues that we can't get all the work out that we want. I'd like to think that when the market catches up and we can get things done, we'll keep closer to that 2% and not the 10% variances that we've seen.
Wes, you've talked a couple of times about bad debt,
Yep.
and I'm really curious. I think that we've seen the economy rebound a little bit, and a lot of people have jobs now that might have lost their job during COVID. And maybe you don't know off the top of your head, but at some point I'd really like to know, how are we doing with our late payments and our locking? I don't like it that we lock rates or lock meters, but how are we doing with that?
And I'd hate to answer right now because I don't have the exact information for you, but to my knowledge, we're doing pretty well. We haven't had a large number of locks, and our bad debt expense is pretty much non-existent, so people are paying their bills. And that's typically, just to add to that, that's typically where we're at. If you look at our historical bad debt expense or, lock, it's really low because we do lock, so typically people, we say, pay your bill, so it's been the trend. So going back to the budget calendar, April, our internal process is we incorporate the operating budget, we start working on the debt service forecasts, and then we really start revising and refining the budget itself. And then we had our second Finance Committee meeting in April, on April 11th, 2023. At that meeting, we actually had it was a pretty long meeting. We had a lot of information, kind of took 2 meetings and put it into one. So at that meeting, we talked about the preliminary salaries and benefits, talked about the operating budget requests, and we talked about the capital budget requests. So that was a long and fun meeting. I think the committee members will tell you it was very exciting. But talking about the salaries and benefits, so this is on page 25 of the draft budget, and hopefully everyone got it should be in the board packet, the draft materials and services for water and sewer, as well as the draft budget that's been developed. So this is on page 25 of the draft budget, and I've added columns to the right here for analytical purposes and for the presentation. And you can see the headers are just for reference to see how the formulas are calculated. And then the first thing I want to talk about is projected versus budget. So budget for 23, how are we doing projected? And we're actually projected to be under budget for 2023 in salaries by $286,000. That's really just low due to turnover and replacing people at lower rates as we fill those positions. It also has to do with some vacancies we have towards the end of the year. I think we have 5 right now, but 2 should be filled by the end of the year, so we should be around 3 vacancies at year end. And then total salaries and benefits are going to be our budget or projected to be $145,000 under budget, and that really goes down to $145,000 because group insurance is projected to be $232,000 over budget, and that's really a result of the increases of the, I think it's the Kaiser plans, or the Blue Cross HMO plans actually had a huge increase this year. So next we'll look at the projected versus actual. So projected 23 versus actual for 2022. And we are projected to be $268,000 over actual for 21 for salaries. Sorry, 23 versus 22. And then total salaries and benefits is projected to be $787,000 over 22 actuals this year. And the reasons for that are really, well, part of it is the group insurance is going to be $317,000 higher. And the other reasons are we had some extra overtime in 22 with a lot of main breaks. And we're really just getting closer to fully staffed than we were in 2022. Next, and possibly most importantly, the budget versus budget. So how are we doing budget for 2024 versus 2023? And salaries are actually budgeted to be $1,066,000 higher than 2023, or 9.73%. And total salaries and benefits is budgeted to be $1.1 million higher, or 6.96% than 2023. The reasons for that are mainly the MOU. So the new MOU has additional costs of about $1,026,000. And we have normal steps, so we have 49 people during the year that are budgeted to get normal steps, and that's for about $140,000 in total. And the remaining difference is there's a proposed position in the draft budget for an assistant operations manager, and the cost of that position is $193,000 in total. So that's the full burden of that position.
That's with benefits?
That's with benefits. So that's the salaries and benefits, and moving on from there, I want to kind of look at, actually, one thing I forgot to mention that's very important. You may note that the PERS, the CalPERS costs are going down by $406,000. This is really important because this is directly a result of the initiative by the district and the board to pay down the unfunded accrued liability with CalPERS. So we are now fully funded, at least in 2022, for our unfunded accrued liability. We actually have a net pension asset of $150,000. Because of that, if you looked at our 2018, when we first started paying it down, the amortization schedule said that we would be paying $1.8 million this fiscal year in 2024. We're fully funded, so we don't have to pay that. So we are not paying that $1.8 million. So really what was happening, though, we paid it down over 3 years. So the payment that was due this year because of those payments was about $700,000. I hope that's not too confusing, but because we paid a third each year, this year it had been adjusted down to $700,000. That's why it's only a $400,000 decrease in PERS.
Good job,
So moving on, this is the salaries and benefits budget versus actual over the last 5 years, and we can see the bottom half are the salaries and the top half are the benefits. So the importance of this slide is really just to show the consistency over the last 5 years. We've really kept salaries and benefits very consistent. I mean, salaries are within $10 to $12 million, $12 million being the highest year this year, even with the MOU, and benefits are ranging from $5.7 up to $6.3 million over the 5 years, and only $5.9 million this year. And we've actually done a pretty good job budgeting, I'd say. We've been within 2.4% budget versus actual over the last 5 years. And it's important overall because it shows that, through scrutinizing positions as they become vacant, we've actually been able to maintain this steady. And we've also taken some pretty important initiatives over the years to keep salaries and benefits consistent and low. And next, I'll kind of go into those. To do that, first I want to look at the staffing levels. So if we go back to 2016, the staffing levels have actually gone down from 115 full-time equivalent positions in 2016 down to 109 now. And during that time in 2017, we actually eliminated 3.5 positions. And then in 2018, we eliminated another 4 positions. So those eliminated positions and the vacancies that we have, and you'll see the green bar at the top shows at year end the positions that are vacant. Those may be vacant because we just haven't filled them through recruitment yet, or maybe we're scrutinizing them to see if we can potentially find other efficiencies and ways to, like the positions that were eliminated. We may have found efficiencies or ways to allocate those responsibilities for those positions. So even just the vacant positions are saving the district money. And overall, the reduction in positions and the vacancies are saving the district hundreds of thousands of dollars, which I'm going to go into detail on now.
Les, can you go back real quick? So one thing this doesn't show is how much the system has grown over those years, right? So we've done a great job of keeping the position count down, but all the demands on our system have gone up. The number of customers we serve, the miles of pipe we have, the number of meter connections, all of those are going up. So if you try to put it in a metric as like positions per meter or positions per customer, we're doing really well and we're doing everything we can. But when you make those decisions, there's less you can do going forward, right? You've pulled the levers that you can pull, so it gets harder and harder to find savings as you go forward. But I think till now we've done a really good job.
Is a lot of that, do we outsource a lot of it? Is that why?
Well, that's part of it, yeah.
I'd love to see like how much we're doing in-house, how much we're doing out-house, just compare.
Yeah, that's a
If
hard.
one's going down and one's going up, then
We try not to say outhouse as a wastewater agency, but.
outsource, not outhouse.
Yeah, it's hard to come up with a metric because it's hard to say like, is it percentage of bodies or dollars that you're
Right.
outsourcing? So we look at those, but we outsource a lot of things. You guys, you see a lot of contracts come forward, things that we could be doing in-house if
Right.
we had staffed up. We've made the conscious choice not to staff up, any more than we think we absolutely need to have, and we take advantage of contract opportunities where possible.
So you can say in-house, not out-house.
Yes, you can say in-house.
Yeah.
Yes, it's okay.
These are some of the best dad jokes ever on here right now.
All right, so.
Thank you.
So yeah, these positions have saved the district hundreds of thousands of dollars, and sort of looking at the initiatives taken by the district. In 2017, eliminating the 3.5 positions has actually saved the district, and this is in today's dollars. If they were working today, those positions were filled. We'd be paying $245,000 in salary. We're actually saving that plus $60,000 in benefits per year for a total annual savings of $305,000. Eliminating the positions in 2018, the 4 positions, is saving the district $286,000 in salary, $70,000 in benefits for an annual savings of $356,000. Other initiatives the district has taken, in 2016, we fully funded the other post-employment benefits of employees, which is now a closed system, but it's fully funded. By doing that, we are able to, now we don't pay for the retirees' medical expenses. They're actually reimbursed to the district where we pay them, but then we get reimbursed from the trust. So it saves that amount of money. And this year, for fiscal year 2024, that amount is $408,000. And it's estimated to be $469,000 by fiscal year 2028. Finally, the initiative I've already mentioned is paying down the unfunded accrued liability. By paying that down through CalPERS, we actually are saving. Here I have $1,245,000. So to explain that, before you may have heard me say $1,835,000. That was the amount that would have been due in 2024. So going forward next year, CalPERS actually realized some losses in 2022. So I expect, hopefully we expect, to have a liability in 2023. As a result of that, we will have a payment in 2025 that we don't know yet. So we're estimating that to be somewhere around probably $600,000 or $700,000, and again, that's probably conservative. The amount that would have been due to CalPERS was $1.9 million. So if you subtract out the $600,000 or $700,000, you get the $1,245,000. That's annual savings that will be saved going forward.
Yeah, so Wes mentioned those PERS costs. There's always about a 1.5 to 2 year lag, depending on how the market affects the PERS earnings and when we actually see the information, the billing from PERS. So you may think, oh, we had a bad year in 22. Why are we seeing a decrease in PERS costs? It's because of that lag.
So yeah, when we started paying down the unfunded accrued liability, we were at like $17.8 million, almost $18 million. So even with a liability of, say, if it comes to $9, $10, $11 million, we still have less of a liability, and the payment will be much less than it would have been given our debt before. So the total savings based on these initiatives is $531,000 in salary per year, $1,783,000 in benefits for a total annual savings of $2,314,000, and that amount is increasing every year. However, it is worth noting that in 2020 we did add a position. So we actually added an asset management supervisor. That position is costing us $159,000 per year fully loaded. And there's a proposed position in this year's budget for the assistant O&M manager. That position would be a cost of $193,000. So we'd have to net that. In total, that's $352,000. We'd have to net that against these savings going forward. So that's salaries and benefits. Next, we're going to move on to the water operating expenses, if there are no questions on that. And here's the pie chart for the water operating expenses, kind of a summary of page 11 of your budget. And we can see the total water operating expenses are $51.1 million budgeted for the year. Of that, $36.9 million is for water purchases, or 72%. So they're pretty much uncontrollable costs we have to purchase that water. So we're going to focus on the other 28%, or $14.2 million, and we've already talked about the salaries and benefits. So now we get to focus on the $3.7 million, which is 7%, and that's our water operation costs. So here is, and before I go into the analytics, I want to kind of walk you through the roadmaps of how it flows. You were given the details in the materials and services, as well as the draft budget. So this is an excerpt from materials and services. This is actually on page 5, and it starts with line 130. And you can see this is their line numbers over here on the top left. This is for the water treatment department, and the top part shows their materials and services, or materials and supplies requests. Then their outside services requests. And then at the bottom, the electricity request for the water treatment department. At the top, the budgeted amount, so this shows the amount requested, the person requesting it, and whether or not those requests are recurring expenses. And you'll notice the majority of our budget expenses are recurring expenses. So this is the detail for the materials. So if I'm going to shrink this down, so here's that same thing. No, there we go. And then it flows over to the budget, and this is page 12 of the draft budget, which rolls up the department in these the 3 categories, or 4 categories. Here we see the water treatment department on page 12 of the draft budget. The $65,000 flows over in there into the summary, materials and supplies. Then you have the $24,000 that flows over to the outside services, and the $12,000 to the power. We're also showing the cost of labor. We just talked about that in total. This is broken down by department. So the total for the water treatment department is $610,000 rolled up in the detail pages in the draft budget. But that flows up into page 11 of the draft budget, which is summary by department. So here's the page 12 rolled up to page 11. So you can see the $610,000 and on page 11. That's how the flow goes from the detail to the summary level in the draft budget. Now we're going to look at the differences in the budget and break it down backwards to show you the detail of how what those differences are made up of. So this is page 11 of the draft budget. And I actually took out water purchases because, as I mentioned, that's new material. Mike will be talking about that in a little bit. So we're just looking at the operating expenses, and I added this column for analytical purposes, and we can see budget to budget, total operating expenses for the water operations department are increasing by $926,000, or 7.24%. I won't go into all the detail. I kind of highlighted some of the departments, and I'll try to keep it to a minimum for purposes of time. And a lot of these I'm going to talk about are also the same explanations for sewer, so I'll go into some detail on water, but try to kind of skip over it on sewer to save time as well. So the main reasons for this increase are increases in transmission and distribution. The majority of that is about a $96,000 increase in labor, and that's directly due to the increase in labor and the MOU costs. And then you have the engineering increase of $179,000. Again, that's mostly labor. $102,000 of that is labor. Then we have the information technology, which we'll look at, and general and administrative expenses increased by $234,000. So looking at information technology increase of $134,000, if we go to the detail on page 14 of the draft budget, we can see the major reason for that is an increase in outside services of $79,000. So if we go further into detail in the materials and services request, we can see on page 15 and 16 of the water materials and services request that there's a SCADA support request on line 482 for $71,000. So that's new this year for the IT departments. That's causing an increase. And then you have the water and sewer GEM system that's being requested for $29,000. So those are the 2 major reasons for the increases in IT. And keep in mind, IT is actually for the whole district. So these 2 items will also apply to sewer. So when we look at the sewer increase, we're going to see it there again. So that's the draft operating budget for water. I'm not finished yet. We got to go into the general administrative expenses. So that increased by $234,000. So if we look at the detail on page 14 of the budget, we can actually see the major reason for that is an increase in labor of $180,000. And then we have an increase in regulatory fees of $136,000. So looking at the detail of the regulatory fees, we can see this is on page 18 of the water materials and services requests. And there's a lead service line inventory request. This is a federally mandated regulation for the district to inventory service lines on the customer side of the meter. So we don't really have a choice in doing this. We're estimating that cost to be $135,000 this year. And you'll notice it doesn't have a recurring, it doesn't have an R on it, so it's not going to be a recurring cost. It's a one-time cost this year that we're budgeting for. So that caused the increase in regulatory fees.
You said it's on the customer side of the meter. So how does that work? We notify the customers, and then we go in and we check the pipe from the meter to their house, or do we go into their house, or how does it work?
I believe it's just to their house.
Okay.
We're not going to be going into anyone's houses. It'd just be the service line from the meter to the customer's
Yeah,
house.
that's correct. We won't go inside anybody's property, their home, but usually you can find out right on the back side of the meter, the customer side of the meter, you can see what type of line is, and right when it enters the house, it's called a 2-point check. You can see, are those 2 points, do they indicate that there's a lead service line or not? You're not digging up the entire line, you're not going inside their house.
And do we have any reason to believe that we would have many of those? Is there a way to sort of rule out houses built after, 19X?
That's the process we're going through right
Okay.
now, and we don't think we're gonna find any, but we're federally mandated to go through the process.
Understood.
I think Director Elletharp had a question.
That was my question. Have we ever found a lead service line?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thanks.
So we, at the County Water Authority level, we're all gonna be tracking our costs so that we can report back to the EPA and say, we collectively spent this many millions and we found 0 problems. I don't know if that'll stop them from promulgating future regulations, but they need to know the cause and effect of their actions.
Can we at least maybe get a certificate?
Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to the wastewater operating expenses. So the wastewater operating expenses budgeted for fiscal year 2024 are $15.1 million. Of that, $3.7 million is going to be for Encino. I'll say thank you, Scott. 25% of our total sewer operating costs. And then we have 26% for sewer operations, and of that, $1.7 million is for the plant, so again, treatment costs. We've already talked about the other 2 parts of the pie, the salaries and benefits, so we're going to focus on the $2.2 million for sewer operations. So now looking at page 21 of the draft budget, this is the sewer operating costs, and that column on the right is for the analytics, and you will notice that the total has increased by $907,000 or 6.4%. The majority of that is made up of increases in cost to Encina of $431,000, so uncontrollable costs, we get an invoice from them once we've approved their budget. And the rest, and another big cost is the increase in the Metal Arc plant. The majority of those costs are recovered through reclaim costs. So if we eliminate those, the actual increase in sewer operating costs is $294,000 or 2.1%. And looking at the major reasons for that, we have engineering again, similar reasons to the water. You've got an increase of labor about $45,000, and there's a request for $29,000 for GIS technical support. And then IT, as I mentioned before, this has to do with the SCADA support and also the water and sewer GEM system. So that's the sewer operating budget.
I've got a question. Is regulatory compliance in that safety and compliance line?
The regulatory, we actually typically split by department. So whatever the regulation applies to, we'll apply those costs to the departments.
So the sewer regulatory compliance, is it all within that line?
No, so.
Yeah, there wasn't really any significant increase on the sewer side on regulatory compliance yet. We do have budgeted for the new discharge requirement. Sanitary discharge.
That's why I'm asking. And is the regulatory compliance in this 276,000, or is it somewhere else?
And you mean in the, no, it would be wherever. So if it was for collections and conveyance, like for sewer collections, it would be in that department. If it was for lift stations, it would be under lift stations. So if we've got permits for lift stations, that's
so
a regular.
It's spread out amongst the individual departments.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so source control would be regulatory in there too.
Right, yes.
Thanks.
So that's the sewer operating budget. So next we're going to be talking about the capital budget. So this next slide is a draft capital budget page. Every project that we have has its own budget page. So just going through what each one consists of, the top actually shows the title of the project. And this, just to note, this is on page 65 of the draft budget if you're interested in following along. So this is the Las Posas Waterline Replacement Project page. So that's the title of the project. We have a description of the project, what it is. Then you have the project manager as well as a project number assigned to that project to allow us to track the costs. Over on the right, you have the responsible department and the funding source. This is where we would see whether it's funded by water replacement, water capacity, sewer replacement, or sewer capacity. So each project has their funding source. And then you have the comments, which is basically just a long description of what the project is and why it's needed. Below that, you have the project spending plan over the next 5 and 10 years. The FY27, 28, and thereafter is intended to cover at least 10 years. And at the bottom, you have the estimated project timeline. So that's the capital project page. And as I mentioned, each project has one of these pages. And then we have an index of these pages on pages 35 and 36 of the budget. And this next page is going to be a lot of information. So this is the capital project index. So we have a page number all the way to the left, which has the page number for each project, their assigned project number, and their title. So I've broken this up. This is pages 35 and 36. I broke it up into 4 pages to make it more readable, and I laugh at that because you can't read this. But this is 1/4 of it. So this is actually the top half of page 35 of your draft budget, and you can see at the top, first I want to point out, page 65 is listed on the index right there. That's the one that we just saw. And then at the top, you can see these are the carryover projects. Carryover projects are projects that were budgeted for in previous years, but just we haven't spent all the money yet or completed the project. That could be for several reasons. They could be multi-year projects. They could just be delayed and now we need to carry them into this year. It's important to note that the total project costs are not meant to be spent in fiscal year 2024 necessarily. They could be multi-year projects, but these are projects that were carried over from last year to this year. So the amount of the carryover, or the previous budget for the carryover projects, was $64.5 million. We are estimating the amount to be spent on those projects by the end of this fiscal year to be $8.4 million. And then the carry forward cost, or the remaining project costs from last year's previous budgeted amounts, would be $56.1 million. So when we carry forward those projects, we know what we spent, we know what we budgeted last year, and then we look at them and they say, what are they actually going to cost in the future years? And again, it could be a 5-10-year project spending plan. So we look at that and we say, these need to be adjusted. So the next column is the new request for those carry forward projects. They can be up or down. You'll see some are reduced and some are increased. This year we have increases in carryover projects of $20.4 or $20.5 million. The major reasons for those increases are we have a Twin Oaks Valley Road Sewer Improvement Phase 1 project of about $7.8 million. A chlorine contact tank expansion is increasing by $4.9 million. And then you have the MRF conversion of $1.7 million increase. So those are the major increases in the new request for in this year's budget.
I have a clarifying question. So some of these are negative balances. So for example, the Las Posas water line replacement that we were just talking about, it's, negative $485,000. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have realized that savings. That just means that it's not going to be spent that year. It's going to be spent elsewhere. This is not money that we're getting back because we
Correct.
Went under budget.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
It just means we've looked at the project now, and we estimate it's going to be either less expensive than it was last year, or maybe we split it out into different projects, and that portion will cost less this year in total. So it could be, again, it could be 5 years spending, and we're saying the total project cost is $30 million, and now we think it's $26 million. So it's gone down by $4 million, but over the 5 years, not necessarily just this year. Hope that's...
So it actually could be a realization of some savings. If in that example that you just gave, it could be, we thought it was going to cost $30 million, it's going to cost 26. In the end, it ends up costing 26. So it could possibly be a savings, but we don't know that just by looking at this, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's true.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question. So I'm a little bit confused. So what do we project we're going to spend in the next fiscal year?
I will get there.
Oh, good.
I broke this out into 4. So, yeah, it's coming up to be.
Thank you.
I asked him the same question when we practiced this morning.
I've got two questions. You probably know what my next one will be after that.
So yeah, these are right now, we're looking at sort of project totals. We're gonna get to the 5-year spending, and actually on this next slide, when my mouse works, here we go. So this is the top half of page 36. So now we can see the 5-year spending on the carryover projects. So down here, and this actually is fiscal year 2024, it's important to note, when we bring the budget forward on June 7th, the board will be considering approving 1 year worth of capital spending, and that's 2024. That's what's shown here. So for the carryover portion of the capital spending for fiscal year 2024 is $19.3 million. Last year, that amount was 21.6, so we've actually seen a decrease for the carryover projects of $2.3 million. But that 19.3 this year is made up of let's talk about 4 of the major reasons for that. One of them is the City of San Marcos Creek District project of $4.3 million. Then we've got the Meadowlark Failsafe Rehab at Buena Reach of $3.5 million. We're planning to spend $1.9 million on the Montiel Lift Station force main replacement. And the 16-inch bypass, emergency bypass, we're planning to spend $1.6 million on that project. So those are 4 of the major projects that will be worked on in fiscal year 2024. So the next part of the slide, or the third of the 4 quarters, is the bottom half of page 35. So this is actually the new projects that are being requested in fiscal year 2024. Again, it's important to note that these are new projects that are starting this year, so this is showing the total project costs that are being requested in total over the multi-year period, not necessarily this year's spending. I'll show that on the next slide. So you'll see at the top it says fiscal year 2023-24 above the new request. That's because there are new projects being requested this year. There's no previous spending or previous budgets. And then we'll see the total new request for this year is $65.2 million. But of that, you have $29.9 million for Encina Wastewater Authority for their 5-year spending plan. So over the 5 years, our portion of Encina's capital budget is $30 million. And then you have future projects of $25.2 million. Future projects are projects that will not be worked on in fiscal year 2024. They're going to be worked on in future years, but we have to include them for planning purposes. So we do a 5-year and a 10-year financial plan, and we want to make sure we have sufficient reserve levels to cover these projects, even though they won't be worked on in fiscal year 2024. So if you take out those 2, so actually, let me go back. So if you take out the first one, which is the future projects, we have 31 new projects being requested for $40 million. Last year, we had 40 new projects for $40.4 million. If you also take out Encina, we have 30 new projects being requested for $10.1 million. Last year, there was 39 projects for $9.1 million, so the total new project requests really only went up about $1 million. Then we see the biggest new project being requested this year is the Montiel Force Main and Gravity Sewer improvements for $2.8 million. That's the single biggest new project being requested this year. And again, that doesn't mean we're spending $2.8 million this year. We'll see in a minute how much we're going to spend on that project. But the overall total of the carry forward projects and the new requests, so our total capital budget for the next 10 years is $141.9 million. Last year, that number was $137.5 million, so we've got an increase of about $4.3 million. And really that difference is attributable to the new requests on the carryover projects. So moving on, this is the 5-year spending on the new projects. So those new projects requested in total, this is the spending plan for them. You can see over the next 5 years, the total for those $65.2 million will be spread out over the 5 years. And the total requested in fiscal year 2024 for those new projects is $11 million. Of that $11 million, $5.3 million for Encina Wastewater Authority projects for over the 5 years. So they're almost half of our new project requests. And if you look at the annual project costs, they're $6 million a year basically for Encina. So a lot of our projects are Encina. And our total capital budget just for fiscal year 2024 alone, which would be the only thing the board would be considering to approve on June 7th. This is a draft. It could change a little bit before then. But right now, it's $30.3 million.
And so about 20 of it's carryover. Is that correct?
So what we would look at there is you really want to take out Encina, because 20 is carryover. You're right, it was 19 point something million dollars. Yes.
So my second question is, do we feel this is a realistic total that we can accomplish?
We have gone And this is actually a note that I have. You're on the committee. Committee members may remember.
I've asked the question
And for the board's information, at the first committee, the April 11th Finance Committee meeting, we came forward with the initial capital budget request. And that the amount of those requests was $47.9 million for FY24 alone, fiscal year 2024. Sorry to abbreviate. And the total was $157.8 million. So Jason and I had some fist fights.
Good to
We
hear.
wrestled a little bit. And we were able to smooth out those numbers and get it down for fiscal year 2024 to $30.3 million. So we were able to actually push out or put on hold several projects, and the total savings was $17.3 million for fiscal year 2024 alone. Now, the projects are going to have to be done. Nobody's saying they're not, or that we're not doing the costs right. It's just a matter of our capacity to get those projects done. And we feel like we've got a pretty good timeline for them in the revised budget.
Yeah, I guess my concern's been being overly optimistic on what we can accomplish, and it kind of messes with reserve levels if we don't kind of meet those realistic targets.
Yeah, it does, and we've had numerous conversations about that, trying to be somewhat optimistic, but introduce a measure of realism to get it in there. So if you look at this, the $30 million in year one of them is about $5.3 million is just writing a check to EWA, so we can get that done, right? And then some of it just a reimbursement to the city, so that's another $6 million or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So about a third of it is just those two projects. So we're really down to about, can Jason and the ops folks deliver about $20 million of projects. Okay. That's been the focus of the fist fights.
All right, well, we're counting on you, Jason.
Yes.
We can do it.
No pressure.
We can do it.
When you're thinking about implementing those projects, for the larger projects, do you scope out sort of a month by month, and you sort of work backwards from when you hope to have it done? Do you scope it out month by month? I don't think we typically see those. Not necessarily that I want to see those, but I'm just wondering, is that a way that you are able to predict accurately? How long it'll take? Things considered, not accounting for the emergencies that will probably arise or supply chain issues.
Yeah, we have a pretty detailed budget scopes that we put together where we detail out, the milestones that we need to achieve during the design phase, and then of course moving on to a construction phase. Is this a 6-month project? Is it a 9-month project, et cetera? And so we kind of build that in and those costs. A lot of variables, as you may imagine. So they're estimates, like General Manager Broom said. It's an estimate, it's our best guess at that time, what we think it's going to take, and the costs associated with that timeline. So.
Okay, so that's the end of the capital budget presentation. Next, we'll move on to the new information. So let's get excited, right? Start over. I should bring the budget party page back up. So next, we're going to talk about, so we'll go back to the budget calendar. So we've actually, in May, we've actually created the reserve projections for the next 5 years and 10 years. And we're starting to work on the draft proposed. You've got a copy of the draft. We're starting to refine that already. We've got some changes to the draft that we're working on. Now we're going to show you the new things that have been added as well as those reserve projections. So here we're talking about the draft budget update and those new items. And here's one of the new ones. So in the Finance Committee meeting, we didn't have the vehicles and equipment prepared yet. So here's the vehicles and equipment, and that amount, or the total amount of vehicles and equipment being requested this year, is $1.9 million. Of that, though, $1.1 million is being carried forward from last year. So you may remember last year the vehicles and equipment budget was $2.1 million. We weren't able to acquire everything, so actually first let me tell you, the total vehicles and equipment budget this year is made up of facilities and equipment of $140,000 and vehicles of $1.7 million. You'll notice the highlighted items have project numbers that start with 2022 or 2023. That's the year that they were originally budgeted for. So this one project here, or this one vehicle, has been carried forward from 2022. So we haven't been able to obtain this vehicle for 2 years. So we're still working on getting these. There's just delays in getting vehicles. We're trying to buy them, but we haven't been able to. So that total carry forward has been $1.1 million. So the new request for fiscal year 2024 are actually $719,000. Another thing I'd like to note is the no-des potable water main flushing trailer. Here we have a total cost of $560,000. We've actually already paid for half of that, so this will be revised in future budgets and will be reduced down to $280,000. And then just some of the bigger items being requested in fiscal year 2024. We had the Freightliner dump truck for $205,000. That's one of the new items. And then we have an FY50 bucket lift truck for $200,000. So those are the two major items. We also have up top on the second line down that I didn't point out is the FY50 flatbed with gooseneck for $150,000. Those are the three major items being requested in 2024. And that's the vehicles and equipment.
I'm going to ask the same question I asked last year. So I noticed that you are purchasing two Ford F-150s.
You got the same question as me.
And I know that you have calculated elsewhere fuel costs. Ford F-150s are available as electric vehicles. So please indulge me and explain to me why we are not considering Ford F-150 Lightnings for $20,000 more bucks for each one.
And if Ed were here, he would say, because we don't have the infrastructure to charge them, I think. So we're working on future planning, because I know that I think the plan is we're required to transition by 2031 to a full fleet of electric vehicles.
Well, it starts in 2024, or 2025, I think.
Okay.
50%. It's a transition. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, we're working on that plan now. We actually have a consultant, and we actually, in the budget, have a consultant on board to look at our infrastructure. Today, if we were to purchase electric vehicles, we don't have the ability to charge them here because we are maxed out on our electrical capacity at this site. We don't even have the ability to put an electric gate for our employee parking lot in the front or an electric signboard up front because we have no more basically breakers left. So one of the things that we're looking at in our planning study for next fiscal year, which is in the budget, is not only to look at what our needs are on actually doing the conversion to meet the CARB rules and look at getting vehicles like the F-150, but also what do we have to do internally on our infrastructure here to be able to support them. So we don't want a bunch of basically dead bricks on site, so we have to make sure we have the infrastructure in place, make sure that it's properly sized, then work with SDG&E to get that new electrical drop here, and probably a new electrical building for them because it's going to be quite large. And that'll be subsequent years in the budget, and we'll come back to the board or through committee to report on that as that information becomes available.
And also more content for our climate adaptation plan that we are working on.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, so I see most of these are replacement. I mean, do we factor in the sale of these? I mean, there's value to these replacement vehicles. I know, I was wondering, how do I?
Yeah, so most of our vehicles, it's more beneficial to trade them in, because we can do surplus through auction, or we can trade them in. We always look at what's going on in the auction, how much they're going for, what we might get, versus the trade-in value, and we net that against these costs. So these costs are net.
You net that, okay.
Yes.
And it's a really good used vehicle market right now.
That's what I was, yeah.
But we run our vehicles pretty hard and pretty long into their useful life. So
Yeah, but they don't know that. The people buying it don't know it.
Yeah, so the lack of charging infrastructure, is that a valid exemption for the new CARB regulation? Because I think 50% of the purchases.
The simple answer is actually no. However, if you have a plan in place, which is we're going to be working on how to get that charging infrastructure basically implemented over time, then you can use that as an exemption partially. So, but you have to show a plan moving forward how you're going to meet that need. You can't just say we don't have the charging infrastructure and that's a continual exemption.
Yeah, because I think half of the purchases had to be electric vehicle by 2024.
If there's
100% by 20.
If there's a commercially available.
Yeah, and I think that F-150s are the only ones that are commercially available.
Right.
Currently, yes.
And I can add that Director Grosset did point me in the direction of a company would help us get rebates on chargers, and I've been in touch with them, and they said the problem they have is we don't have the infrastructure, like James mentioned. To be eligible for those, you have to have a plan already developed to increase the capacity, electrical capacity of your operation site. We're not there yet, so even if we submitted an application, it would be rejected. But we're working with them. As James mentioned, we're putting a plan together so that when that plan is ready, we will then submit applications for those rebates at that point.
So is it calendar year 24 or the CARB regulation?
I think it's calendar year 24 that it starts, yeah.
So, I mean, if you ordered in 23, you wouldn't have to comply with that.
Right.
I believe also the city of San Marcos is providing some rebates for charging infrastructure. I don't know if it's only residential, but that might be something to look at. And I don't know what exactly the benefit is as far as the money, but they have advertised that they are providing some kind of incentive.
Yeah, there's a lot of money available out there, but there's a lot of restrictions, and only certain programs qualify. For example, some are only for your fleet vehicles, some are only for the public, some are for like your fleet and your employees, some are for everybody. So you have to really tailor and figure out what kind of infrastructure, what service are you providing before you start applying for these programs.
So then next we'll move on to the water sales and purchases, and Mike's going to be the star of this show.
Thank you, Vice President Boyd Hodgson and directors. So I wanted to start off with some of the assumptions that we use and some significant events that are happening in the economy and the market. A couple of years ago, we had the COVID, which didn't materialize as we thought. I think now it's even harder to predict what's going on with the interest rates, with the supply chain issues and everything like that and stuff. So what I wanted to do is talk about, first of all, the Water Authority. Right now, they have not finalized their budget, and they're giving out numbers anywhere between 9.7 and 13.7% increases in the price of wholesale water. So we're estimating in our budget that we have before you today, we are estimating about 10%. If we're off by 1%, I just wanted to kind of give you what the magnitude that would be. Each 1% increase or decrease is about $370,000. The Water Authority is proposing a 2-year budget of $1.85 billion, and out of that, only 7% is for their operating departments, so $128 million. The rest is for their purchased water, their debt service, their capital. So really, the controllable portion of it is very small, almost like, pretty much like our budget too. For VWD, as General Manager Pruitt discussed, we are not talking about rate increases right now, but we did have to put some assumptions in the budget. And one of the assumptions would be that we would pass through pretty much the maximum amount that we can do, which is about 6.5%. There's also, we're predicting some weather-related demand bounce back. As you know, we've had the torrential downstorm in February and March. And I don't know about you, but I thought I saw a boatload of animals crossing the 78 2x2. So we're not predicting that we're going to have those 40 days of rain anymore. So we are predicting that we'll be bounced back to about normal. And I'll go over those numbers in a little bit. And speaking of numbers real quick, I was really impressed by the student that said she was going to go into all the numbers and stuff like that. I was back there cheering for her. So this is a new slide that I put together for this year. It shows our water purchases of percent of our total water budget. The green line up top is 100%. It's not a dollar amount, it's just 100% of our budget. The blue line is the percentage of our purchased water cost, and then the orange line is our operating cost. So we've always talked about that our water purchases are about 70% of our budget, and that was true back a couple of years ago. Everything to the left is history and in current budget. But as you can see, our water purchases are creeping up in percentage of our total budget, which makes it harder to control any increases. We're projecting that the water is going to be about water purchases are going to be about 3/4 of our budget coming up. So going over our estimates for this year, our water sales are about estimated about $29.3 million. That's actually down from the budgeted amount of about $2.3 million. So our sales are going to be below budget by about $2.3 million. Again, that's almost directly related to the weather. Our ready-to-serve charges of about $15 million is pretty much on budget, and our cost recovery for the pumping is about $421,000.
Can you explain what that is again, please?
The pumping?
The pumping cost recovery.
Sure. So that is for those people that live in a higher elevation. It's to pump the water up to that elevation, and it's based on feet of lift.
Yeah, we have 10 different pump zones. Only 9 of those are occupied by homes, and it constitutes about 15% of our total customer base that get this surplus charge, this pump zone cost recovery.
That's only electric.
Yeah, it's only 90%. It was tagged initially at 90% of the electrical only, so it doesn't pick up any of the capital or operation and maintenance costs of those.
And then our water purchases are projected to be about $32.4 million this year.
That's below budget by about $2 million. That's just because we're purchasing less water. So for this year, we are budgeting $33.9 million in revenue. And a lot of that, as I discussed, was a bounce back of the demand. And also the built-in 6.5% increase that I mentioned. Ready to serve charges be about 15.5, and that's basically just the increase of the 6.5%. And pumping and recovery charges, just a minimal increase. For our purchase water, it's going to go up about $4.4 million. And again, that's mainly that 10% pass through from the water authority. And I'll go a little bit more detail in our purchase water costs. I think it's the next slide. Yeah. So we have different sources, if you will, of water. We've got our desal water, which is a contractual obligation to buy 3,500 acre feet. We have a contract with OMWD for a raw water exchange of about 2,750 acre feet, which gives us about a $65, $63 credit per acre foot. And the rest of the remaining water is made up from San Diego County Water Authority. In addition, and I've showed this, I think, for 2 years now, we have an agreement to purchase additional desal above and beyond the 3,500 acre feet. And if we do that, it is at the regular San Diego County Water Authority rate of $16.88. So all told, we're proposed to purchase about 15,000 acre feet of water. The commodity portion is about $30.8 million, and the fixed charges of $6.1 million. And that gets us to the 36.9. What I also like to do is a sensitivity analysis. Now here, what if we had another wet year? What would that mean? What if we had a dry year and people are using their sprinklers all the time? What would that mean in terms of our budget? So I kind of did a bookmark of a minus 10% demand and a plus 10% demand on our budget, and what that would mean in our terms of our net revenue, our net reserves, I mean. And net reserves are the net of the change in our net revenues less our net expenses. So that means if there's a 10% decrease in demand, we'll be purchasing less water from the water authority, but we'll be losing revenue. So that is the net number of the two. So with a 10% demand cut, it would hit our reserves by about $1.5, $1.6 million. Conversely, if demand were to go up 10% from what we projected in the budget, we'd see a net positive to the reserves of about $1.7 million.
And I think it's also worth noting, you know, we have just approved going to drought level 1, and drought level 1, correct me if I'm wrong, is a voluntary reduction of 10%. So I know that we have been in that stage before, and I think we netted out about a reduction of 4% rather than the 10%. So how realistic, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but how realistic is it that we are going to see somewhere in between the 5 and the 10?
I would say it'd be between the 5 and the 5. I don't think well, unless it rains a lot. It wouldn't be because of a reduction unless more severe drought restrictions come in to play, I believe. So I think we're really pretty much online. I do have our last couple of years of demand was about 15, in 2021 was 15,500 acre feet, and now we're only projecting 15,000 acre feet of purchases. And another year was about 15,000 acre feet. So we're using kind of historical for the last couple of years. Plus, we are growing at about 1%. Our meters are growing at about 1%. So we were really conservative. I didn't really use the whole 1%. I used about half of that. So with the bounce back from the weather and the 1% growth, unless, again, there's some significant weather pattern coming on, I think we'll be pretty much probably within the 2% of those numbers.
So, question on that growth, I mean, 1%, even if we factor in, I mean, there's been a few larger developments. I mean, you've got Kaiser Hospital, I'm sure they use a ton of water, I'm guessing. And then that development right in front of them, and then the one off Las Posas. Those seem like larger. Are we going to increase more than 1%? Is there a little spike here?
Possibly, but I want to be ultra conservative right now just because of what's happened in the economy and what's happening going on. So I was really conservative in our demand projections.
But it could be, I mean, those are larger developments. I mean, that's a lot of households going in, right?
Yeah,
With Creekside coming up as well, and North City, it seems like there's some projects that are larger projects coming on.
There's some decent-sized projects, but I think in this year, we only added like 350 meters, and we already have existing 22,000 customers. So when you look at it as a percentage, it seems like a lot of activity, but it's not, doesn't move the needle that much.
Okay, thanks for explaining.
So I think that's all on the water side for Sewer is relatively easy. Sewer, there's no projected rate increases for the next fiscal year. So sewer revenues are projected to be about flat from about $18.2 million. We have reclaimed water sales, which is OMWD and City of Carlsbad, that we get reimbursement from. So it's about $3.2 million. And our other revenue, fines, fees, late locks, things like that, of about $300,000.
Do we ever raise those rates for our sale of the reclaimed water?
So the sale of the reclaimed water is based on our actual expenses. So we have costs at Meadowlark, Lift Station 1, and Mar Reservoir. All those costs are charged to a certain fund, so we track them exactly, and Levenhagen and Carlsbad are billed based on those. So we budget for the year what we think they'll be, we bill them based on the budget, and at the end of the year, we either refund or we recover more based on the actual amounts.
Yeah, so it's basically just cost recovery. We are in the process of renegotiating the agreement with them, so it may change things slightly, and the board will see that when it's ready for approval.
You know, one of the things that I was struck by when Scott was presenting to us is, you know, their loss of revenue due to the parcel that they're no longer to derive revenue from, and that trickles down, right? That impacts us. It impacts all the member agencies, and it sounds to me like, you know, they're going through some kind of negotiation with the City of Carlsbad, and it really struck me how we are all connected, even though we are all somewhat independent. So that's why I was wondering, you know, do we ever talk about trying to recover some of that money based on rising costs that are out of our control that may have actually been directly contributed by the City of Carlsbad? Just curious.
Yeah, and we are currently recovering, should be all of our costs for the reclaimed fund from Carlsbad and Levenhagen, but we are renegotiating the contract with them as well.
Yeah, but so it's a competitive market, right? We're not the only producer of recycled water. So if we continue to raise our costs, you may find the City of Carlsbad and the Levenhagen Municipal Water District trying to find other sources. So we have to be careful. We have to price it smartly, and because I'd hate to lose that $3 million in revenue. Our costs would go down too. We wouldn't be producing that water, but net it would be a loss for us, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. It helps to understand the bigger picture.
And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Wes.
Thank you, Mike. So next we're going to talk about the reserve projections, and this is actually on pages 132 and 33 of the draft budget. We're going to talk about the replacement reserves because those are the reserves that actually affect the rates. We'll talk about it for water and for sewer and how we do our projections and what we look at. So the reserve policy says that we will maintain 6 months of operating reserves in the reserves, operating expenses in the reserves, and 3 years of projected system replacement costs. So that's our floor. So 6 months of operating expenses plus 3 years of projected system replacement costs. So this is the floor for the water replacement reserves. In 2024, you can see the floor is actually $20 million. By 2028, that amount is projected to be $23 million. The ceiling for the water replacement reserves is 6 months of operating expenses plus 10 years of projected system replacement costs. So the ceiling for 2024 is $56 million. By 2028, the ceiling will be $62 million.
Who establishes those ceilings?
Those are established based on our reserve policy, which is a policy.
You as the board.
Our district,
Yes.
okay,
It's
so
a
we do,
board
that's what I'm saying.
policy.
Okay.
Yes. So this chart shows the floor and the ceiling. Now we'll look at where our reserve projections are going to be based on the draft budget for the next 5 years. So the orange line shows our reserve projections for the next 5 years. And you can see we've kind of come close to the ceiling. The reason that we've built up those reserves was to pay for future capital projects that we knew were coming up. So this shows in 2023, well, let's go with 24, we will be at $39 million after capital expenditures. So that's still, below the ceiling, but in between above the floor and in policy limits. By 2028, so 5 years from now, we're projected to be at $25 million, which is $2 million above the floor and still within policy limits over the next 5 years. So that's our 5-year plan. We want to make sure that we're within policy limits, that we meet our debt service coverage ratio, that we have the appropriate days in cash. These are the preliminary estimates, but this is where we are with the water replacement reserves in the draft budget. So next we'll move on to the sewer replacement reserves. So the sewer replacement, the floor is different, the ceiling is actually different for sewer replacement. The floor is exactly the same. The ceiling is different in that it's only 8 years of projected system replacement costs. That's just because sewer assets actually age faster and need to be replaced more frequently, so we did 8 years versus 10. So now you see the floor and the ceiling. the floor for sewer is 32 million, ceiling's 86 million in 2024. By 2028, it'll be 41 million and 92 million respectively. And now looking at the sewer replacement reserves projected in the draft budget. So first I want to show you what they would be without an assumption we have built in. So this is what the reserves would be if we just went and didn't make any adjustments to it. And you'll see in 2024, we're at 51 million, which is above the floor and below the ceiling, so within policy limits. But by 2028, we actually go below the floor. So we'll be at 37 million. That's a result of all the capital projects that we have in the sewer. The majority of them are in sewer. So that pushes us below our floor. So at that point, we're outside of policy limits, so we are forced, well, we should take some action. So what we do, and in this 5-year plan, you'll see it's in 2027, so 4 years from now, we're projecting to spend these capital expenditures. So we assume that in 2027, to get that amount above the floor, that we'll need to issue debt to satisfy that. We have 2 triggers or 2 levers we can pull. We can raise rates or we can issue debt. Raising rates to cover, $5 million is a lot of money, so it's, at that point, it may be necessary to consider issuing debt. It's 4 years from now. It's our financial plan. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that's what we sort of build into our financial plan. So and that's the 2027. So looking at what happens is we'll have to issue approximately $7 million in debt to cover those 2 years. So if we do in 2027, that brings us above the floor, and then we're within policy limits. We meet our debt service coverage and our days in cash. So this is what's actually in the draft budget that's been distributed to you. So that's what the reserve levels look like for both water and sewer replacement.
Now, obviously, if we did that, then our operating costs go up, because then we have a debt service component that we don't currently have. Well, we have some, but we'd have additional debt service coverage, or debt service requirements.
Yeah, and we haven't raised rates in 9+ years, and maybe we should have been doing that all along to avoid this situation.
Yeah, so
it's Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah, so it's not too late. So one thing Wes didn't mention, and maybe he was going to mention, is that there is some built-in rate increase assumptions on the wastewater side here, and I think it's not next year, but it's the year after that. I think it's 2.5%. It's in there. So we're starting to work those in, and every year thereafter for the 5-year forecast, we're showing 2.5% increases. Still runs into a little bit of a problem. This coming fiscal year, with the budget the board will be approving, we have money in there to perform a Prop 218 or a cost of service study on the wastewater side. Remember, the one we just did was water only. So now we're going to take a closer look at the wastewater, primarily because of the chart you're looking at right now. We realize there's a problem. So Wes mentioned there's 2 things you can do. You can either raise rates or issue debt. There's a third thing, and you can defer projects, right? You can continue to push projects out. You run the risk of not operating your system appropriately when you do that.
Taking on increased risk.
Yes.
Failure.
So I brought this up before, but let's talk interest. And so it seems like between your 2 reserve funds here, if you were getting a market of 4 to 5%, which is fairly easy to do. I mean, it's why regional banks are in trouble, because it takes all of 90 seconds to move your money using technology today from whatever regional bank you're at to whatever technology base that's getting the preference of treasuries. And I've been told that we're at somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% interest?
2.2.
2.2.
We're at 2.2, yeah.
So roughly double, if not more, which seems like a potential 4th option of making up $2 million right there in just this year's interest alone. So I'm curious, are we stuck with this? There's no 90-second transfer for us.
So unfortunately, we're not necessarily stuck. We are confined or restricted to our investment policy. It's the investment policy we review every year, and we see what vehicles we have available to invest our money into. We actually have some of our money in a local agency investment fund. That's sort of the liquid portion that we need to move in and out for operational costs. But we keep it there so it earns interest. That, I think, is earning actually more. It's like 2.6, I believe, right now that LAIF is earning. We also have investment advisors in Chandler Asset Management. So they're investing a good portion of our assets, but they're restricted to the investment policy. That doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't meet with them and say, hey, we want to see our investments earn more. They are restricted to our investment policy.
And did the board set that investment policy? And is it worthy of some sort of emergency action to reset that based on, I mean, the investment advisor is doing very much a disservice by not going into the safest asset available right now, which is U.S. Treasuries of 5%.
So we are restricted, we have to stay within government code. So their biggest confinement is the government code, and they have to follow that. Every year we try to look at the investment policy, they do actually, our investment advisors, and say, what can we add to that? What can we put in asset-backed securities? Can we add in different investment vehicles that will increase the return? So currently, outsourcing it, it's our job to kind of see what they're doing, but their job to look at those vehicles. You're correct, and we can invest in U.S. Treasuries. It is a meeting that we have discussed, and I intend to have with them to say, are we doing everything we can to earn as much as we can within the limits of the investment policy?
Yeah, so two comments. The difference in the policy, we talked about the reserve policy, the floor and the ceiling, that's 100% up to the district. We get to choose that. But as Wes just mentioned, on the investment policy, we answer to a higher authority, right? You have the feds and the state saying, you can't go invest in cryptocurrency. They really limited us. And I don't know all the details with like treasury notes and things, but liquidity is important to us. We have to make sure we can access that money quickly. So if you invested in something that ties up the funds for longer than the period of time than you need access to it, that could become problematic too. Having said all that, I agree with you. We need to spend more time with Chandler or look internally. Slightly related, on the Water Authority side, one of the reasons they think they may be able to lower their rate increase is they think they'll have an additional $10 million in investment returns because of the rebound in their investment portfolio. So I think we would be well served just to invest in the same things the Water Authority does, even if we don't invest in things outside of that.
Sure. And I fully endorse any sort of accelerated movement that may be interest of the rest of the board here.
So I have a question on our reserve policy, the 6 months in operating cash. Is that based on communications with the rating agencies? How did we set that?
Yeah, it's based on industry best practices. We look at JFOA best practices and other best practices, what other agencies are doing, but mostly it's the industry best practices, and they usually recommend either 3 or 6 months of operating expenses that you maintain as the floor for your.
Well, I've got a question. How does the Water Authority get a AAA rating on 68 days of cash? It astounds me.
They just have too much money, I guess. I don't know. Well, yeah, I mean, there's several criteria that go into the rating agencies, but that is one of them.
I have a comment and a question. Are we bound by policy to do a cost of service study before we issue Prop 218 to raise,
Yes,
potentially raise?
that is a requirement of Prop 218. You have to conduct a cost of service study. It doesn't say how it has to be done or who does it, but you have to have a cost of service study.
And when is that scheduled? For the,
I think is there a line item in the budget or, okay. So the budget, if the board approves the budget, the funds will be available July 1. So sometime after July 1, we can start getting in contact with consultants and start the conversation. There's a lot of other work going on too. We haven't scheduled when we're going to start that Prop 218 process. We may not even go to an outside consultant. We may be able to do it internally. You can do your own internal cost of service study. We'll be in contact with Best and Krieger. They'll give us legal advice, and we'll go in the direction we think is in the best interest of our board, district, and the ratepayers.
okay, thank you. I'm hearing from my colleagues that there is a bit of a sense of urgency around this. I don't remember seeing this before. Maybe I have, but I don't remember seeing it, and it's making me very nervous. We have done such a good job issuing debt and then paying for it. I'm leery to issue debt again, and especially for such a small amount as you described. But I'm also leery of revising the policy. I'd like to learn more about the underpinnings of that policy. And you mentioned industry best practices, but maybe the policy committee and the finance committee need to have some conversations about the origins and whether or not it's outdated. Because this is not an insurmountable problem, but it is a problem that becomes more difficult to solve with more pain points the longer we put it off. So I would be in favor even of trying to explore ways that we can start mitigating this with this year's budget. I know that we haven't talked about that before, but maybe there are some things that we can do to start mitigating it rather than waiting until next year, because I do think that the longer we wait, the more pain it's going to be.
So, and if I can provide some comfort, this is 4 years out. So we're talking about almost the last year in our 5-year projection. So a lot of things can happen between now and then that could alleviate $7 million. If we don't, say projects get delayed, we have $90 million scheduled over the next 3 years. If we don't get that $90 million done, there won't be a need to issue debt in 2027. It's really not something that we should panic over now being 4 years out. If it were 2 years, maybe even 3 years, I would think there'd be more of a sense of urgency, and I might be like, we better start looking at issuing debt, considering alternatives. But being 4 years out, hopefully I can give you some comfort in saying there's a lot that can happen between now and then, and $7 million, it's not something that we should really get alarmed about, I don't think.
Yeah, and
Wes said we should not
not
get
worried.
alarmed.
He comforted me, gave me a warm hug.
So if Jason doesn't get all his projects done, that'll change this.
If he doesn't, we're good for next year. So seeing this 4 years out, like we had the $28 million planned, and I think that was 2 years out. So that I was like, okay, this is probably more than likely going to happen. We've got these projects, they're gonna happen in 2 years. This is 4 years in the future. Anything can happen this year, hopefully not this year, next year, the year after. 4 years from now is really hard to predict, and only being, $5 million under the floor, it's really not, when you're looking at $42 million. And it's not like our reserves are going to zero. We do have $41 million in sewer reserves. So there's a lot we can do before this happens to alleviate any potential issues.
Yeah, and every year you'll get an update on this. When we come to next year's budget, you'll be seeing a revised version of this curve. And did things come as we predicted, or was it slower, or was it accelerated? It's not time to hit the panic button yet, but it's on our radar screen.
I just said I was nervous. I'm not panicking,
Yeah.
just to set the record straight.
Right.
But I appreciate that we do talk about this, and I think, irrespective of whether we are nervous about this now or later, I think some education around the, why the reserves are set the way they are would be really helpful, because I think 3 of us probably don't have that background.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be great.
And just to kind of add to what Wes was talking about, one of the big drivers of that in the outer years is going to be our land outfall replacement project, as a parallel land outfall. That's a large project that goes through an environmental area, and that costs a lot of money. But just that environmental process will probably spread that project cost out, probably increase the cost, but it'll spread that project cost out considerably, just to get the environmental regulations and approvals. So.
And part of that is $30 million in Encina capital projects. If they don't achieve their capital projects, it also affects our sewer reserve forecast, and it's 4 years in the future. There are just a lot of factors that can affect, 4 years in the future.
No, just comment, I appreciate Wes's calming voice on the not panicking, but Director Grissett made an interesting point. If we invest those dollars now, earlier, so I don't know what we need to do. What does it take to amend our investment policy? We have an investment policy, but it takes just one vote to amend it?
Yeah, we would probably process it through the finance committee preliminarily, and then take it to the board for a final, and get in touch with our financial advisors and legal staff too.
So we can amend and possibly invest differently?
Yes.
So the investment policy comes to the board every year. Every year we bring the revised investment policy. So at that time, and we could do it at any time really, but it does come annually. So it's not like it's been sitting on the shelf for 15 years. Every single year we come forward with anything that we're allowed to change on the policy based on our investment advisors. I think the necessary steps for us as staff, meet with the investment advisors and say, hey, the market's changing, things are changing. What are we doing to keep up with that, and how can we make sure that we're maximizing our investment returns?
Perfect. Wes, when does the policy typically come to the
I
board?
think it's calendar year, so I think it'll be in January. So it may have just come to the board in January and would come again. But again, we can do it at any point. And if we meet with Chandler and say, hey, are there any changes? The issue with the investment policy is we are restricted to government code. There may not be anything they can change the investment policy, but there may be action they can take to improve our investments. So I don't know, maybe they can sell some existing investments that are getting lower returns to invest in higher return investments. Things like that might be. We could take some of our funds that we have in LAIF, we could increase the amount we send to them if they can find a way to increase our returns and beat LAIF. Currently, our investment advisors, their returns are below LAIF. So there's really not an appeal to send the money to the investment advisors right now because they're not achieving more returns.
Right, and treasuries is the safest, most liquid investment you can do right now, and would be a guaranteed extra $200,000 a month if all of this was assumedly invested in it. But
They were
And
very accommodating last time. They came and spoke with us and did a great presentation. So, you know, I think we have a good relationship with them, and yeah, let's reach out to them. I think that's a good idea.
And another good idea might be to have them come present to the finance committee or to the board and give you more information and answer questions that you may have.
I would love that. I mean, especially with this large amount of capital, like getting less than 10% return is actually a pretty bad thing in my opinion. So I'd love to hear the reasoning behind that. Like, there's no.
You need to be my investment advisor.
You just go to www.vanguard.com, you give them your money, and they will get you 10% every year, basically.
Yeah, right now it's really good.
That's the secret. People just don't
So
want
it
to type
might
that in.
behoove us to do this before January, though.
Yes.
What I took out of that was called Vanguard.com.
Yeah, that's what I got too. Everybody did.
Easiest thing.
So those are replacement reserves, and part of that too is to show you the process we go through. As we look at the 5-year forecast, I want to explain what we do in our analysis. We look at the reserve projections, and we have to meet certain criteria for our rating agencies, and you'll hear more about this as we present the budget. But we look at our debt service coverage. We'll present on the days and cash forecast in the next presentation. You'll see all the stuff that goes into how we establish our 5-year plan and what we consider to maintain our AA+, maybe hopefully even improve it to a AAA credit rating.
When was the last time we had AAA?
We have never had AAA. We started at AA back in 2008, to my knowledge, and then I think we got upgraded in 2009 to a AA+, and we've been able to maintain it. We did have full surveillance done with our 2021 debt issuance, and I was pushing hard for that AAA. I even wore a suit and a tie for no reason, but I told them, you dress for the rating you want, not the one you have. So that's the end of the replacement reserve schedule. Next, just the next steps in the budget process. So at the end of this month, or May 17th, we'll have the proposed budget brought to the board. It'll be the draft proposed budget. So we'll bring that forward May 17th, and then in June, we'll just improve the draft proposed budget, revise it and refine it, make it the best possible budget we can bring to you, and hopefully on June 7th, we'll get board approval on the final budget. That's the end of my presentation. So if there are no questions, we'll see you next time on May 17th.
Yeah, and I would add that hopefully on June 7th, it's very simple. We've answered all your questions, the issues you've raised. Hopefully we can touch on most or all of them on May 17th. If you have anything more on May 17th, let us know. But when we come on June 7th, we're hoping there's not new issues that are raised. We're just tracking down issues that have already been raised.
Yeah, the last board meeting of the Water Authority, they indicated that the agency-specific impacts would be ready by the May 16th workshop. Have you heard anything different?
Heard the same thing. They're having committee meetings on I think it's the 15th and the 16th.
The 16th and 18th.
The 16th and 18th, and our meeting's on the 17th. So if we get a hint on the 16th, we'll try to incorporate those numbers in there. So that's an important point. So Mike mentioned that the Water Authority increase may be 9.7 to 13.7%. That's the average for the Water Authority. Each member agency's actual percentage varies. Your mileage may vary, right? So we don't know those numbers yet. So we're waiting breathlessly. We may find out we're 2% worse or 2% better than the average, which could swing these numbers a lot.
Yeah, so I'm kind of previewing my report from the San Diego County Water Authority, but the San Diego City representatives have said they will not vote for a budget that's double-digit in rate impacts.
Do they have a weighted vote?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they're about 39 to 40% of the.
Yeah, they have 10 of the 36 directors down there.
So I think we have that in our favor.
Yeah.
And they're done with the rate mitigation efforts that Water Authority staff has offered. We're down to about 10%, but there's some other issues going on with reduced water sales that may bump that up another percent or so. So we're hovering right around that 10% figure.
Yeah. And we don't think even if they get it down to 10%, this is not a one-year phenomenon. You're going to see Water Authority increases double digits for the next 3 or 4 years.
How long are we locked into the desal rates?
30 years from
Oh, really?
2015, 2014, whenever the agreement was signed.
So those are locked in for 30 years?
Yep.
Okay.
There's some off-ramps, but it's unlikely that we'll be able to take advantage of them. Certain conditions have to present themselves.
Okay, well, thank you, Wes, for the presentation. Thank you, Mike.
also very thorough, and I think we had a lot of questions and we had a robust discussion, so I'd like to thank my colleagues for that. Do we have any more discussion items for that particular item? Because I think this is just for information discussion only, we're not.
Yeah, just an informational update.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Nice job, Wes.
Okay, great. Then we will move on to action item 2.3, scholarship contest recommendations for 2023. Before I turn it over to General Manager Prum, I'd like to thank my colleague, Director Grissett, for, we sat together and we looked at the scholarship applications. We had a lot of very, very accomplished students applying, and we have narrowed down the field that we would recommend receive the scholarships.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to turn it over to Chris in the interest of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, General Manager Prim. So Vice President Boyd Hodgson, back in February of 2022, the board voted to implement a scholarship program, and the requirements are that the individuals submit an application, they get a letter of recommendation from a faculty member or somebody. They write an essay, and they provide a worksheet with a financial needs assessment. Last year, I believe we got 13 applications. This year, we issued a press release February 1st, called all of the counselors at the high schools locally, talked to the counselors at the two colleges, and set a deadline of March 31st. We received 20 scholarship applications, so a modest increase. And as Vice President Boyd Hodgson noted, the committee has looked at it and they have recommended scholarships for 6 of the applicants that are from local high schools or the local colleges. And I'm recommending that the board approve $1,000 scholarships for 6 students. And once I get approval, we will put in the information into the system to get them checks, and then we will invite them here once the checks are cut, bring them to the board meeting, have some fun with the 6 winners. And just as a side note, they were all pretty happy. So, kind of the fun part to be able to tell them, hey, you got the scholarship. I didn't hear anything from the ones that didn't get it, but that's not quite as fun. But if the board can make a motion, that would get us moving.
Well, thank you again, Chris, for all of your work on this. I know that this is sort of outside your job description. We're very grateful that this is a way to give back to the community. It feels very good. It helps young people study water or the environment. It helps local students at high schools. It helps people at Palomar. It helps people at CSUSM. So thank you for your help and leading this and pushing it through. So any discussion? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the recommendations.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the committee for working hard on this. Really appreciate it. And I'll go ahead and move staff's recommendation.
Okay. Director Elitharp moves. Do I have a second?
Second. He took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you.
Director Pennock seconds. Any further discussion? Okay. Please vote. And it passes with 4 yeses. Hernandez absent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, action item 2.4. Aqua is seeking a president and vice president, seeking candidates rather, and Region 10 board candidates. I'll open up the floor if anyone, or maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah,
you have a description, or?
I'll just add a little. No,
Okay.
you captured it well. So if any board members are interested in being on the statewide board to be president or vice president, or want to be on the board of the Region 10, we have to submit a letter of interest and an application package, and it has to come with a resolution from our agency. So if anybody's interested, let us know, and we'll come back at the meeting on the 17th with a resolution supporting your candidacy. Just because you submit an application package doesn't mean you're on their board, right? You may get on their slate of candidates. So there's no guarantees, even if we get the support from our home board. All staff is looking for is anybody interested in throwing their hat in the ring.
Anybody want to raise your hand? No takers just yet? Well, I think you've got some time if anybody changes their mind, and you can let General
Yes.
Manager Perum know
Yep, that's
if
fine.
you change your mind.
Okay, great, okay, moving on. Reports, General Manager Prum.
Yeah, so just one item, well, actually two items. So Vallecitos staff will be hosting a booth at this weekend's Wildfire Preparedness Fair. And this event is sponsored by the City of San Marcos Fire Department and CAL FIRE. And the purpose is to raise awareness of wildfire dangers and to educate people on what they can do to protect their own personal safety and their property. The event is on Saturday, May 6th from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. at Walnut Grove Park, and it's located at 1950 Sycamore Drive. And again, we will be hosting a booth there. And the only other thing I want to say is I want to thank Chris for all his help with the 5th grade program, and Ivan, and everyone who supported it. It's a lot of work to do those things, but it's incredibly rewarding. So Chris is my go-to guy on all those, so I want to thank him publicly for all the efforts he put in there. And that's all I have.
General Counsel.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I have no report this evening.
Okay, thank you. County Water Authority.
Yeah, during our budget discussions, I talked about the deliberations at the Water Authority, so that's all I had to report on, so I'm good.
Okay. Director Pinnock and I both attended the Encino Wastewater Authority meeting, and we essentially went through the budget process that we just approved. Okay, standing committees. The P3 committee met last Monday, and we talked a little bit about something that I think we've all mentioned in one meeting or another, the onboarding process for new directors. So Director Grosset and I will be working through that process with staff leading it, and we will be putting together some new documentation to help new board members understand how to do their jobs. And we also talked about the fall and spring water academy discussion, and we will be potentially making some revisions to how we have run that in the past. Those we're still under discussion though. And that's it for the P3 committee. Any other standing committees? Okay. Directors' reports on meetings, conferences, or seminars attended.
Guess we're all going to be in Monterey next week.
Yes, we will all be at Aqua next week. Okay, any, let's see, other business, we have the quarterly board expenses that were provided in the packet. That's just for information only. And finally, we have some upcoming meetings. The San Marcos Chamber of Commerce State of the City address, May 31st, 2023 at CSUSM. And I think we need to discuss about whether or not we're attending or covering, or how's that working?
You'll have to let us know, sorry about that. You'll have to let Ann and Anthony know if you desire to attend, and the board has previously added that to the list, so you are eligible for a per diem and for expenses. So if you can just let Ann and Anthony know. And when is the deadline?
Friday.
Okay, it's just,
Otherwise it's
the price goes up if, yeah.
You know what time that is?
7:30, 7:45?
7:30 to 9:30.
Can we just let you know now? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think you're already on my list.
Okay.
You already said yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay. Water Education Foundation Headwaters Tours, I guess those are beginning. They're June 21st to 22nd, beginning and ending in Sacramento, and I believe the same applies if you would like to go.
Yep.
I think they fill up quickly, so if you would like to go.
It does conflict with a board meeting.
Oh, it does, okay. Okay. All right, any prospective future agenda items?
I would just bring up what we had talked about in the budget to, revisit the investment thing to make sure that the avenues are open to maximize the amount of return that we can as safely as we can.
Okay, I will agree to that, and I'll provide my second director support.
Thank you.
So hopefully we can have a conversation about that. Any other discussion? Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, colleagues, for your attention and for hanging in there for a long meeting. It was a wonderful meeting, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.